Chapter 974. However, how are you going to explain this to Emperor Chu? Mo Jingli was not a magnanimous person who cared about the big picture. He probably wouldn't be able to see Zhao Lian retreat for the sake of the army's safety. He would only see Zhao Lian disobeying the decree and letting Mu Yang go. Zhao Lian smiled bitterly and said, "This old man will do his best. Moreover, I might die on the battlefield at any time. What's the point of thinking so much?" To be honest, this old man really doesn't have much confidence in dealing with Lu Jingxian. Seeing how the Marquis Mu Yang was dealt with, Zhao Lian's heart was not completely unaffected. However, as a subject, if the emperor wants the subject to die, the subject must die. General is righteous. Lei Tingfeng praised sincerely. On the other hand, Mu Yang had only left the camp for 4 hours before he met with Gao Ming's army. Originally, the two armies would not meet so quickly. However, when Gao Ming was about to reach the camp, he received news that Mu Yang had already escaped with his army. He immediately turned his troops around and chased after them. At the same time, he quickly sent a letter to Mo Jingli's camp, stating that Mu Yang had already led his army to betray him. He even did not forget to complain about Zhao Lian. Gao Ming always felt that he had worked so hard for Mo Jingli all these years. However, he was always suppressed by these generals from large families. Now that he had the opportunity, how could he let it go? When the two armies met, Gao Ming immediately gave the order to charge forward. Amidst the chaos, there were countless casualties. Just as Gao Ming was feeling pleased with himself, he saw a group of black soldiers charging out from the side and surrounding the two armies that were fighting. Gao Ming saw the black flag fluttering in the wind and was so scared that he almost fell off his horse. He shouted in fear, "Mahist army! Black Cloud cavalry!" Mu Yang's face also darkened. He vaguely felt that something was wrong. The Black Cloud cavalry's strength was naturally not something that these normal Chu army soldiers could compare to. After a series of rampage, the Chu army's formation was immediately shattered. The leading black-clothed man said in a deep voice, "If you are willing to submit to the Prince Ding mansion, then stop immediately." The black-clothed man's voice carried a deep internal energy that spread in all directions. These soldiers were already dizzy from the sudden infighting. Now they were frightened by the Black Cloud cavalry. Originally, these soldiers did not have any ill feelings towards the Mahist army. They even had some fear and dissatisfaction towards the battle with the Prince Ding mansion. At this time, under the lead of someone, many people quickly put down their weapons and left. Soon many peoples to put down their weapons. And even protect them from the swords and swords. To protect them, to protect. In less than half an hour, the entire battlefield had quieted down. The number of soldiers who chose to throw down their weapons and surrender to Prince Ding's residence was as high as tens of thousands. Both Mu Yang's and Gao Ming's men were present. Mu Yang was still protected by a few loyal guards as he continued to resist the Mahist army. Gao Ming had already fallen into the hands of the Mahist army. The black-clothed general carried Gao Ming forward and said in a deep voice, "Stand down." The Black Cloud cavalry soldiers that were originally surrounding Mu Yang immediately stopped and respectfully moved to the side. Mu Yang stared at the black-clothed man in front of him for a while. He finally said with a frown, "You are Qin Feng?" Mu Yang and Qin Feng had only met a few times. However, Mu Yang still remembered the silent man who was said to be the commander of the Prince Ding mansion's most mysterious Qilin. Qin Feng nodded his head without a care. He casually threw Gao Ming at Mu Yang's feet. Gao Ming stood up with a dispirited expression. He looked at Qin Feng with some fear. He only felt that he was very unlucky. He had always been suppressed by Mu Yang. Now that Mu Yang was about to be unlucky, he was sent by the emperor to capture Mu Yang. However, he still ended up being captured by the Mahist army along with Mu Yang. At this moment, Gao Ming truly felt that Mu Yang was his nemesis. The traitor of the Prince Ding mansion. How dare you? This general is a general of the Dechu state. Gao Ming looked at Qin Feng, who didn't care about him at all. He roared fiercely. The general beside Qin Feng twitched his mouth. He couldn't help but lower his head and cough lightly. "Commander Qin, is there something wrong with this guy? Was the status of a general of the Dechu state something to be proud of? Especially now that the two armies were fighting against each other, and they had already become prisoners." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and smiled. "So what if he's a general of the Dechu state? Now that the two armies are facing each other, wouldn't the more generals of the Dechu state that I killed, the greater the merit? Hearing this, Gao Ming's face instantly paled. He didn't dare to say anything else. Mu Yang stared at Qin Feng and frowned. Princess Ding's methods are good? It seems that Princess Ding had already predicted that this one and General Gao would meet here. Please ask Princess Ding to come out and meet me, Qin Feng said indifferently. The princess consort isn't here right now. I'm afraid that Marquis Muyang won't be able to do as he wishes. Muyang frowned. I wonder if my humble wife was taken away by Commander Qin's men? She's just an innocent girl. As a general, Commander Qin probably wouldn't make things difficult for a weak girl who doesn't know anything. Doesn't know anything? Qin Feng's expression was a bit strange. Muyang nodded. That's right. This one was defeated by Commander Qin. Even if I die, I have no regrets. However, my humble wife and servant have nothing to do with this matter. Please be magnanimous and let them go. Qin Feng looked at Muyang and shook his head, saying indifferently, what a pity. Actually, Muyang himself wasn't a hateful person. If Marquis Muyang's mansion didn't offend Prince Ding, he wouldn't be so unlucky. Even at this point, he still didn't forget to plead for Yaoji. He could be considered loyal. Unfortunately, they all served their own masters and stood on different sides. However, Muyang had to die. Commander Qin. Muyang's expression changed slightly. Qin Feng said casually, of course I won't hurt Yaoji and Mu Lai. Muyang stared at Qin Feng, not knowing what he wanted to say. Suddenly he felt a cold pain in his abdomen. He looked down in astonishment and saw Mu Lai's big smiling eyes in his arms. There was actually an obedient and innocent smile. Mu Lai said with a grin, because I'm a member of the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 975. This sudden turn of events stunned everyone. While Muyang was in a daze, Mu Lai, who was originally sitting in his arms, flew up and pounced towards Qin Feng. But because everyone was shocked by this sudden change, none of the guards beside Muyang actually stopped him, allowing him to fall to Qin Feng's side. After being father and son for a few years, Muyang realized that he didn't understand his son at all. At least he didn't know that he had such good qinggong. Mu Lai stood beside Qin Feng and smiled as he waved the dagger in his hand. Godfather, how is it? Qin Feng patted Mu Lai's head with praise, causing Mu Lai to smile happily. Qin Feng's praise wasn't just the praise of a father to his son, but more importantly, it was the praise of a Qilin commander to a future member. Mu Lai, who had made it his life's goal to become the youngest official member of Qilin, was naturally very happy. Muyang painfully covered his abdomen, which was bleeding profusely, and bent over on the horse's back. He looked in disbelief at his son, who was very familiar yet strangely unfamiliar. Lai, you, Mu Lai looked at Muyang and sighed helplessly. He said faintly, do you still not understand? I'm not your son. What? Muyang shook his head absent-mindedly. He felt that everything in front of him was ridiculous. He even thought that he was hallucinating because he was too tired these days. After a while he looked up at Mu Lai and said, you're not Lai. Then who are you? What did you do to Lai? Mu Lai said, I am Mu Lai, but your son's name isn't Mu Lai. Back then you didn't even ask what Yaoji named the child? Muyang couldn't hold on any longer and finally fell from the horse's back. The guards beside him quickly supported him and glared angrily at Mu Lai, who was beside Qin Feng. Mu Lai shrugged innocently. Seeing Muyang's pale face due to pain and shock, Mu Lai couldn't bear it. Speaking of which, Muyang really didn't treat him badly all these years. Although he was secretly harmed by his wife a few times, who didn't have some shameful private matters in a noble family. Unfortunately, the house of Marquis Muyang had offended someone they shouldn't have. Back when they arrived in Chu capital, Prince Ding had already decided the end for the house of Marquis Muyang. The peaceful days of the past few years had already been earned. You're from Prince Ding Mansion. Muyang gritted his teeth and asked, where is my son? Mu Lai's Marquis Muyang's Marquis house of Marquis Muyang's Marquis. Could it be that Ding Wangfu is unwilling to let go of a newborn baby? Thinking of this possibility, Muyang's heart could not help but tremble. Perhaps his son was long dead, and the one he doted on all these years was just a spy planted by Princess Ding in the house of Marquis. If it wasn't me who stayed in the house of Marquis all these years, your son would have been killed by your wife. Mu Lai curled his lips and said discontentedly. If it was really Yaoji and a child who didn't know anything who returned to the house of Marquis, that child would have died many times over. Mu Lai was a little resentful towards Mu Yang's accusation. Mu Yang was stunned for a long time, then he suddenly laughed out loud. Looking at Mu Lai, he said, "Were you the one who leaked the defense and secrets of the battle with Lu Jingxian? The Prince Ding mansion is really something, even a child can." Mu Lai pursed his lips and smiled but didn't answer him. The excessive blood loss made Mu Yang a little dizzy. Perhaps he also understood that he couldn't escape today, so he didn't force himself. Waving his hand, he broke free from his subordinate's support and let himself fall to the ground. After resting for a moment, Mu Yang opened his eyes and asked, "How is Yaoji? Even if you're not her son, she's been good to you these years." He can't even. Mu Lai was a little embarrassed and didn't speak. In fact, he originally hoped that Mu Yang wouldn't ask this question. It would be less painful if he didn't know anything. It would also save Yaoji from dealing with the current situation. He didn't expect Mu Yang to still ask. Mu Lai looked up at Qin Feng and Qin Feng looked at Mu Yang indifferently. A clear female voice came from behind the crowd. "Let me say it." The Mahist army stepped aside and Yaoji strolled out from behind, looking at them indifferently. Mu Yang looked at Yaoji in front of him. She was dressed in white, and the white fox cloak made her look even fairer and more delicate. She was different from her usual glamorous self. Although she didn't wear the luxurious clothes of the House of Marquis, she looked more peaceful and elegant. Obviously, she didn't suffer much these days. Looking at the woman in front of him, Mu Yang finally squeezed out a bitter smile. Seeing the situation in front of him, what else didn't he understand? Why, why did you do this? Mu Yang looked at the woman in front of him in pain, as if Yaoji's appearance was more painful than the stab Mu Lai gave him just now. Yaoji looked at him indifferently and said, "Do you still remember the letter I left behind when I fled with the child?" Mu Yang was a little dazed. After a while he remembered and nodded. "I remember. You said that you didn't want to see me or anyone from the house of Marquis Mu Yang again. But later you came back with Liar, I thought." Yaoji's smile was a little bitter. "You never took my words seriously. I've understood it ever since I brought Liger back to this world. You still don't understand. I brought Liger back not because I thought it through, but because I am a spy of the Prince Ding mansion. You should have been on guard against me from the day I came back." Yaoji always believed that Mu Yang loved her very much. But Mu Yang never listened to her seriously, so Mu Yang never suspected her intention of suddenly bringing the child to the house of Marquis Mu Yang. He just thought that she had suffered enough outside with the child and naturally came back. You hate me so much," Mu Yang said miserably. Yaoji shook her head. "No, I don't hate you. I just don't love you anymore. The Prince Ding mansion and princess consort saved me and my child. Mu Yang, I just want my child to be safe and happy in this world. Even if I have to sacrifice you." Mu Yang spat out a mouthful of blood. Mu Yang raised his hand to stop the guard who wanted to help him up. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Yaoji, I never thought that the house of Marquis Mu Yang would be destroyed by you." Looking at the clear dark clouds in the sky, Mu Yang's eyes were distant and empty. He still remembered when he was a high-spirited teenager, riding a horse on a slanted bridge and dancing with red sleeves. When he rode past the Qingqing lane, he happened to see a beautiful woman with light makeup sitting lazily by the window, looking tired. From then on, he fell into the endless soft red and couldn't get up. But now this woman was dressed in white and looked cold. She was no longer the beautiful dancer in the Qingqing lane who could dance in the capital. As for him, he was no longer the romantic and elegant young man he used to be. Chapter 976. Mu Yang suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed as if he had never laughed so wantonly in his life. But the people who heard his laughter didn't have the slightest joy on their faces. Instead, there was a bit of sadness in their dignified expressions. "Yaoji, come here. I have a few words to ask you." Mu Yang looked at Yaoji and said. Yaoji nodded and walked forward slowly. "Mother, don't." Mu Lai cried anxiously. "Yaoji." Qin Feng frowned. Mu Yang was already at the end of his rope. No one knew if he would drag Yaoji down with him. Yaoji looked back and smiled faintly. "It's okay." Seeing her faint smile, Qin Feng's heart sank slightly. He frowned but didn't say anything to stop her. Yaoji walked to Mu Yang and squatted down. What do you want to ask? Mu Yang looked at her. You're really not afraid that I'll kill you? Although he was seriously injured now, it wasn't difficult to kill Yaoji at such a close distance. Yaoji looked indifferent and didn't say anything. Mu Yang smiled faintly and asked in a low voice, That child is in Glass City. He's fine. Yaoji said. Did the Prince Ding mansion take the child away? Mu Yang asked with a bit of hope. Maybe he still didn't believe that the woman in front of him would betray him. Maybe she had no choice but to do it for the child? Unfortunately, the cruelty of reality forced him to face it. Yaoji shook her head slightly. No, I asked to come. I don't hate you, but Marquis Muyang Mansion didn't let us go anywhere in the world. The only place I can go is the northwest. But it has enmity with Marquis Muyang Mansion. Prince Ding wanted to destroy Marquis Muyang Mansion and make the old Marquis suffer. As for me, I want my child to live peacefully under the protection of Ding Palace. It's that simple. Prince Ding. Mu Yang closed his eyes in pain. Originally, the Prince Ding Mansion and Marquis Muyang's mansion did not have any enmity, but that year his father acted on the orders of the late emperor to attack Princess Ding, which brought a huge disaster to the Muyang Mansion. Over the years, Emo Jingqi was dead. More than half of the nobles in West Hill were killed or injured. Zhennan Palace almost had no descendants. The king of the northern region, Ren Qining, was destroyed. Why was it that only the house of Marquis Muyang was spared? Turned out that Prince Ding had already started to deal with the house of Marquis Muyang. It was just that they didn't know about it. The glory of the house of Marquis Muyang that their father valued the most in his life would bear the infamy of being a traitor after their death. The house of Marquis Muyang would have no descendants from then on. Their children would wander about outside and they would never even see them. However, he treated a spy of unknown origin as his only son and doted on him for a few years. Prince Ding's revenge was truly ruthless. Father isn't dead yet, is he? Mu Yang recovered from his chaotic thoughts and grabbed Yaoji to ask. If Prince Ding had arranged all this to take revenge on the house of Marquis Muyang, then he would never have let his father die so early. Yaoji sighed slightly. Looking at Mu Yang's anxious eyes, she nodded gently. Marquis Muyang was indeed not dead yet, but Yaoji knew that no one could save him. His ending had long been decided. It would definitely not be more comfortable than Mu Yang's current situation. How could Mu Yang not understand what Yaoji understood? He was also a very smart person. After knowing so many things, it only took him a moment to connect all the dots. From the moment Yaoji and Mu Lai were taken away, it was a trap aimed at the house of Marquis Muyang and perhaps Emo Jingli. Prince Ding. Good move. In the end, Mu Yang could only smile bitterly. Yaoji. Qin Feng said in a low voice. They had caused quite a commotion here. If Xiao Lian's army found out and rushed over, there would be trouble. Yaoji nodded. She stood up and silently walked behind Qin Feng. Mu Yang's complicated gaze fell from Yaoji to Mu Lai, who was standing beside Qin Feng. In the end, he shook his head. Mu Yang will bear all the sins of the house of Marquis Muyang. I beg Prince Ding and Princess to spare my father's life. The people present did not respond. How could Prince Ding's decision be so easily overturned? The fact that Prince Ding could endure for so many years for the sake of tormenting the house of Marquis Muyang and did not kill the old Marquis Muyang back then was enough to explain the problem. Even if the princess personally pleaded for mercy, it might not be useful. Qin Feng said in a low voice, I will pass on your words to the prince. No one can influence the prince's decision. But Marquis Muyang will not die for the time being. The prince still wanted to see the old Marquis Muyang. Naturally, he would not let him die. Of course, if he committed suicide, it would be a different story. Mu Yang finally sighed and said, I was thinking too much. Take care. Before his voice died away, Mu Yang's blurred eyes due to excessive blood loss suddenly opened. He pulled out the long sword of the guard beside him. A bloody light flashed. Mu Yang stared fixedly at the distance and gradually lost his luster. Yaoji closed her eyes and did not look at the man lying in a pool of blood behind her. She turned around and walked to the back. Mu Lai took a look at Qin Feng and also turned to follow her. Qin Feng glanced at the situation in front of him and ordered in a low voice, Go and bring Marquis Muyang out. Send Mu Yang's body to him. Even the iron-willed Black Cloud cavalry soldiers could not help but show a trace of pity when they saw this situation. They could only sigh in their hearts. The old Marquis Muyang was unlucky to provoke someone he should not provoke. On a quiet and deserted hillside, Yaoji sat alone on the hillside. She was lost in thought as she looked at the bleak scenery in the distance. Mu Lai came over and sat beside her in silence. After a long time, Yaoji smiled faintly. "Why don't you go with them?" Now that the war was fierce, Qin Feng and others could not stay here for too long. Mu Lai shook his head. "Foster father said there is nothing for me to do. I will stay to protect you." Yaoji did not want to leave with the army. Qin Feng did not force her. He only left some people to protect her secretly. Mu Lai also stayed behind. The next thing would be the battle of swords and spears on the battlefield. No matter how short the Mahist army was, they would not let a child go to the battlefield. Looking at Yaoji's dejected Muyang, Mu Lai sighed. "If you want to cry, then cry. I will not tell anyone." In fact, he also wanted to cry. He was an orphan since he was young. Although he was taken care of by the Prince Ding mansion and did not suffer any grievances, he was not as happy as a child who was loved by his parents. Muyang was his father for a few years. He was really good to him. No wonder the teacher who trained him said that the most important thing to be a spy was not martial arts or ability, but a heart as hard as iron. If he was like this, it was needless to say how sad Yaoji was. Yaoji smiled faintly. "I have expected this ending a few years ago. What is there to cry about?" Mu Lai looked at her and asked softly, "Did you just want Mu Yang to kill you?" Yaoji was silent, but Mu Lai knew he guessed right. He quickly grabbed Yaoji. "Don't think too hard. Don't forget, you still have a son. You still have me. Don't I call you mother? Do you blame me for stabbing Mu Yang?" Chapter 977. Yaoji shook her head and rubbed his little head. She said, "Silly child, no matter what you do, it will be the same in the end. Don't worry about me. I still have to go back to Li City and watch you and your little brother grow up safely." Mu Lai finally relaxed and asked, "Will you bring little brother back?" Yaoji shook her head. "It is good as long as he grows up safely. Also, his adoptive parents have taken care of him for so many years. Why should I disturb him? What, you don't want to raise me in the future?" Mu Lai hurriedly shook his head and said, "How can that be? Don't worry. I will take care of you and adoptive father until you grow old. If you want to see little brother, I will bring him back for you." Looking at the child carefully looking at her, Yaoji's cold heart couldn't help but feel some warmth. She smiled faintly and leaned against Mu Lai to hum a little song. The gentle and moving tune added a bit of lingering desolation in the bleak cold spring. Yaoji looked at the setting sun in the distance and tears silently flowed down her face. In the Mahist army's camp, Lu Jingxian looked joyfully at the woman in white sitting next to him. He laughed loudly and said, "Everyone says that Qi Lin appears and disappears mysteriously. This general has seen the power of the Mahist army today. This general admires you." This time, Lu Jingxian had been able to break through the blockade of more than 100,000 soldiers with very few casualties. Qi Lin's contributions could not go unnoticed. If it wasn't for the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion delivering the news of the Chu army, Lu Jingxian would have been able to pass through, but he would have lost many soldiers. Not to mention he had suddenly received news from the Wang Fei today, telling him to immediately attack the Chu army's western army camp. Originally he had been worried. After all, the difference in numbers between the two armies was too great. It was not a good idea to attack them face to face. However, halfway through the battle, not only did Princess Ding bring reinforcements, but the Chu army also mysteriously ran away. After the soldiers returned to the camp and hearing Wang Fei's explanation, he finally understood that in just a few short days, Wang Fei had set up such an interesting plan to cause internal strife in the Chu army. After hearing Lu Jingxian's words, Yili smiled bitterly and helplessly. "I didn't come up with this idea. Mo Xiuyao's plan was to instigate internal strife in the Chu army, but it was more to deal with the house of Marquis Muyang. Therefore, this was prepared for the house of Marquis Muyang from the very beginning. Mo Jingli could only be said to be an innocent bystander. However, he naturally couldn't tell his subordinates about this. The fewer people who knew about Prince Ding's revenge, the better. Lu Jingxian said, "Right now Yun Ting is holding back Mo Jingli's army at the Cold Valley Pass. I'm afraid we have to act quickly." Yun Ting only had a few 100,000 soldiers. The terrain outside the Cold Valley Pass was not very advantageous for the Mahist army. If Emo Jingli steeled his heart and gave up on the few 100,000 soldiers, Yun Ting would be in danger. Yi Li nodded and said, General's words are timely. Take advantage of the fact that something happened to the Western Army and their morale is low. We have to quickly send troops to deal with this. However, Lei Tingfeng is also here. I'm afraid it won't be easy to deal with, Lu Jingxian said with a frown. If it was only Zhao Lian's 200,000 soldiers, the Maoist army would definitely win. However, Lei Tingfeng's Shilling army was also here. They could fight slowly but they didn't have the time. Yi Li shook his head and said, Lei Tingfeng won't fight us here. Lei Zhenting didn't send Lei Tingfeng here to help Emo Jingli fight the Maoist army. Reporting to the Grand General Wang Fei, Governor Qin has returned. Outside the tent, a guard reported. Lu Jingxian nodded and said, Invite Commander Qin in. Qin Feng opened the curtain and came in. He said in a deep voice, Greetings to Wang Fei and Great General. Yi Li looked at Qin Feng and asked, Mu Yang? Qin Feng said respectfully, Mu Yang has already committed suicide. The Chu army's General Gao Ming has surrendered. This subordinate has brought him back. Gao Ming? Yi Li frowned slightly. She didn't have any impression of this person. Behind her, Zhuo Jing reported, he is Emo Jingli's old minister. He has been following Emo Jingli since he was princely. However, after Emo Jingli ascended the throne, he has been suppressed by Mu Yang and doesn't get along well with the house of Marquis Mu Yang. This time, I'm afraid he didn't stop adding insult to injury for the house of Marquis Mu Yang. Yi Li frowned slightly and said, Lock him up first and bring him back for the prince to deal with. Lu Jingxian was moved and said, Princess, since this person is Emo Jingli's confidant, he should know not to reveal the Chu army's secrets. Qin Feng said, Gao Ming has already expressed that as long as Princess spares his life, he is willing to tell us everything he knows. It's not difficult to spare his life. LV Jingxian nodded, but Wang Fei, this person can't be used. For traitors, people don't like them. Traitors were never liked, especially traitors like Gao Ming who liked to add insult to injury and his methods were clumsy. Yi Li nodded and said, General is right. Huijing, you go and do it. Yes, this subordinate will take his leave. Zhuo Jing said respectfully. Yaoji didn't come back? Yi Li looked behind Qin Feng and asked softly. Qin Feng nodded and said, she wanted to relax. This subordinate left a few people behind to protect her. Mu Lai is also with her. Yi Li nodded and said, let her be. This matter is already difficult for her. As a woman, she didn't want Yaoji to face such a thing. However, as a wife, she couldn't stop Emo Shuyao from setting such a trap. Because in her heart, no matter how much she sympathized with Yaoji, it would never surpass her feelings for Emo Shuyao. Needless to say, Emo Shuyao's hatred for the house of Marquis Muyang was because of her. Even if she could forgive him, she would never forcefully erase Emo Shuyao's hatred for them. She was no longer the soldier from her previous life who always looked at things from the standpoint of fairness and justice. She was the princess of the Ding Palace, Missouri Xiuyao's wife. Thank you, princess, Qin Feng said in a low voice. Chapter 978. In the Chu Army's West Army camp, Zhao Lian and Lei Tingfeng sat opposite each other with bitter smiles. Mu Yang and Gao Ming's troops were ambushed by the Maoist army at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the Chu army lost tens of thousands of troops. Now, the two finally understood that the events of the past few days were all part of the Prince Ding Mansion's scheme. Because of this, they actually lost the most resourceful old Marquis Muyang and the most promising rising star of the Chu army. The Prince Ding Mansion's methods were truly frightening. Lei Tingfeng lowered his eyes and said, now that we have removed the Marquis Muyang, I'm afraid the Maoist army's next target will be you and me. General Zhao, you must be extremely careful of Lu Jinxian's army. Lei Tingfeng knew that Lu Jinxian's army must be very anxious to meet up with Yun Ting on the other side. However, Lu Jingxian was not the only one who was in a hurry. Lei Tingfeng was also in a hurry. In the west, news came from his father and Emo Shuyao that the battle was not going well. Zhao Lian nodded solemnly and said, Lei Shizi is right. Although the confrontation with Lu Jingxian these past few days made Zhao Lian feel that his eyes were wide open, what made him very depressed was that his military strength was clearly above Lu Jinxian's, but he was still suppressed to the point that he could not display his full strength. Zhao Lian had to admit that there was a gap between him and Lu Jingxian. However, this was already the last line of defense before Lu Jinxian's army left Cold Valley Pass. No matter what, he had to stop them. Hearing that Zhao Lian wanted to use the tactic of delaying, Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed and he did not say anything more. When he returned to his tent, a guard immediately delivered the battle report of the Xiling army. Although they were nearly 1,000 li away, the battle report of the Xiling army and the Mahist army was delivered to Lei Tingfeng without missing a single day. Looking at the secret letter in his hand, Lei Tingfeng sat down and pressed his tired forehead, asking, "Did father have any instructions?" Originally, he could have brought hundreds of thousands of Xiling army here in secret and easily set up a trap. However, the thing in Mo Jingli's hands was too important. He could only expose his military strength in exchange for that list. Compared to hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the Lord of Jinnan's mansion needed a hidden chess piece that could turn the situation around at a critical moment. The guard said in a deep voice, "The prince said that prince did not do anything wrong. However, we still need to retreat. We must withdraw from the current stalemate as soon as possible. The battle in the west is not good for Xiling. The prince suspects that Mo Shuyao sent an army of nearly 200,000 people to go around our back. Prince, please rush to Yuming Pass, which is 300 li west of Hanggu Pass, within half a month to stop this army." Lei Tingfeng was stunned and said in a deep voice, 200,000 people? How can the Mahist army have so many people? The total strength of the Mahist army was less than 1,000,000. Previously they had wiped out millions of troops, so the Mahist army should have lost at least 200,000 people. Even if the Mahist army did not lose a single soldier, and with the troops stationed in various places, it was impossible for the Mahist army to send another 200,000 people to attack the Xiling army from the rear. The guard said, "Prince, you forgot that the Prince Ding Mansion's military service system is different from other countries. According to the prince's estimation, if Prince Ding is willing, he can at most mobilize 1,000,000 well-trained soldiers within a month, and another 2,000,000 recruits within 3 months. Currently, the Prince Ding Mansion's area of control could be said to be the top of all countries. They had just defeated the northern tribes, and the morale of the Prince Ding Mansion was high. If Prince Ding wanted to recruit soldiers, it could not be easier." Lei Tingfeng could not help but gasp. The most reassuring thing about the Mahist army was its military strength. The Mahist army's military strength had never been large, but they had forgotten to take into account the resources of the Prince Ding Mansion and the rallying power of the Mahist army. Once Mo Shuyao wanted to expand his military strength, he would have an endless supply of soldiers to replenish it. "The prince also has a message for you," the guard said respectfully. Lei Tingfeng looked at him. The guard said in a low voice, "The prince said that you don't have to worry too much about Mo Jingli. He can't win against Princess Ding. Prince, please leave as soon as possible." Lei Tingfeng was stunned for a moment. Only then did he understand his father's intentions. His father had never intended to work with Mo Jingli. From the beginning, his father had never thought highly of Mo Jingli. The reason why he had made such an arrangement and formed an alliance with Mo Jingli was to use Mo Jingli to restrain Yili. After all, one Mo Shuyao was already very difficult to deal with. If Yili was added to the mix, even the Jinnan Palace might not be able to handle it. Once his goal was achieved, Mo Jingli would be useless. Whether Mo Jingli won or lost, it didn't matter to the Jinnan Palace. If Jinnan Palace won against the Prince Ding Mansion, then it would be best if Mo Jingli lost. After that, Jinnan Palace would be the biggest winner. If Jinnan Palace lost, then Mo Jingli couldn't be left alive. He would become a huge threat to Jinnan Palace. After thinking for a moment, Lei Tingfeng raised his head and said, "I understand. Go back and report to my father. I will leave this battlefield as soon as possible. Tell my father to take care of himself." The guard nodded and respectfully left. "Your subordinate will take his leave." In the tent, Lei Tingfeng was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Come." A man who looked like a guard appeared at the door. "Crown Prince, send a letter to Princess Ding for me. I want to talk to her," Lei Tingfeng said. A trace of surprise flashed through the guard's eyes, but he still replied respectfully, "Your subordinate obeys." About 10 miles away from the camps of the two armies, Yili was sitting by a small stream. She was leisurely watching the stream flow by. Her expression was calm. On the grass by the stream, new green shoots had sprouted from the withered yellow weeds. It added a trace of warmth and hope to the desolate scene. Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing stood side by side not far behind Yi Li. They were both thinking about their own matters. Suddenly, Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing looked at the forest behind them. Qin Feng said, "Crown Prince Lei, since you're here, why don't you come out and meet us? Princess Ding's side is indeed filled with experts. I am impressed." Lei Tingfeng walked out of the forest and said with a smile. Yi Li stood up. She turned around and said with a smile, "Crown Prince Lei is also a rare expert. Unlike Yi Li, who doesn't have any skills and can only bring a few people with her to avoid any accidents." Lei Tingfeng's mouth twitched. If this woman in front of him didn't have any skills, then there weren't many people in the world who could. At the same time, Lei Tingfeng was also surprised by Yi Li's caution. Lei Tingfeng rarely fought and there were not many people in the world who understood the depth of his skills. But Yi Li did not forget that he had a father who was one of the top 4 experts in the world. Lei Tingfeng's talent was not bad. As long as there were no accidents, Lei Tingfeng's martial arts would not be bad. Wang Fei is joking. When encountering Wang Fei, it is always other people who have accidents, Lei Tingfeng said with a faint smile. Yi Li did not care about his hidden mockery. She smiled faintly and said, "Now that the 2 armies are at war, Crown Prince Lei has privately requested to see Yi Li. Is it to mock Yi Li?" Lei Tingfeng smiled faintly and said, "Wang Fei is straightforward. This Shitzi will not be long-winded. This one knows that Wang Fei is in a hurry to go to Cold Valley Pass to meet with General Yunting, right?" Yi Li nodded slightly. Some things on the battlefield could be hidden, but some things could not be hidden from others. At least the current movements of the Mahist army could not be hidden from people like Lei Tingfeng. Chapter 979. If this one and General Zhao work together, is Princess confident that we can reach Cold Valley Pass in half a month? Lei Tingfeng asked. No. Yi Li said frankly. Ending a battle quickly required the right time, place and people. Most of the time it was indispensable. Not every battle could be controlled. Otherwise, a battle would not have lasted for 3 to 5 years. Although they did not have the advantage in terms of military strength, both Yi Li and Lu Jingxian were confident that they could defeat Zhao Lian and Lei Tingfeng. But the problem was, it would take a long time. Lei Tingfeng was slightly surprised by Yi Li's honesty. However, he soon understood that Yi Li also knew the reason for his visit. Otherwise she would not be so direct. He smiled bitterly and helplessly. "It seems that I can't hide it from Princess. This one plans to withdraw the army and leave immediately. Princess, please make things convenient for me." Yi Li smiled. "Making things convenient for others is also making things convenient for yourself. Lord Lei, please do as you wish." Lei Tingfeng looked at Yi Li suspiciously. "Does Princess know why this one is withdrawing the army?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "Isn't it to protect Genom of Gojoseon's flank? Since Princess knows. If you leave, won't you ruin Prince Ding's plan?" Even after so many years, Lei Tingfeng still felt that he could not understand this woman. But after experiencing so much and hearing so much about her, Lei Tingfeng could not help but be cautious. Yi Li looked at the stream in front of her and calmly said, "If I let Lord Lei pass, Prince Ding's plan will only be ruined. Also, Lord Lei may not be able to stop him, right? But if this consort does not let Lord Lei pass, Yunting's hundreds of thousands of soldiers will immediately suffer. How can this consort not know what is important and what is not?" Lei Tingfeng was stunned. He finally cupped his hands towards Yi Li and said, "Since this is the case, many thanks for Princess's help. This one will take his leave. Take care. I won't see you out." Yi Li nodded. Watching Lei Tingfeng's figure disappear into the woods, Yi Li said in a low voice, "Princess, the West Hill has played Emo Jingli like this." Yi Li smiled and said, "From the beginning, Lei Zhenting did not take Emo Jingli seriously. Emo Jingli and Lei Zhenting were not equal in terms of ability. How could he ask Lei Zhenting to treat Emo Jingli as a partner? From start to finish, Emo Jingli was just a tool in Lei Zhenting's hands. Once Lei Tingfeng retreats and Emo Jingli loses Mu Jingmin and Mu Yang, I'm afraid they won't be able to hold on much longer," Zhuo Jing said. Qin Feng frowned and said, "Even so, Emo Jingli's military strength is still above ours. It's impossible for us to go back to help the prince in the near future." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "That depends on how long Emo Jingli can hold on." Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing both remembered that when they went to Nanjing they had made arrangements. It was really hard to say how long Emo Jingli could hold on. Lei Tingfeng left quickly and hurriedly, showing no mercy. By the time Zhao Lian and LV Jingxian returned from their battle, the barracks had long since been deserted. Zhao Lian had no choice but to order someone to quickly report the matter to Emo Jingli. When the news reached Emo Jingli's camp, Emo Jingli was also furious. There was no other reason. Marquis Muyang, who was imprisoned in the army, had mysteriously disappeared. In the past few days, Emo Jingli's anger had been rising sharply. All the officers and soldiers in the camp kept quiet out of fear. They were very careful, fearing that they would provoke the emperor's wrath if they were careless. Emo Jingli deeply felt that this expedition could be said to be not going well from the beginning to the end. And these few days he was in a terrible fix and had his hands full. First, he suspected that the house of Marquis Muyang had betrayed him and sided with the Prince Ding mansion. Before the truth came to light, Muyang dared to kill his guards. When he sent Gao Ming to capture Muyang, unexpectedly Muyang and Gao Ming fell into the hands of the Mahist army, and Muyang committed suicide. In this way, he who suspected that the house of Marquis Muyang had sided with the Prince Ding mansion was like a silly clown in the eyes of outsiders, being played by the Prince Ding mansion. Just as Emo Jingli was considering whether he should release Marquis Muyang to appease him or just kill him to prevent future troubles, news of Marquis Muyang's mysterious disappearance came from the camp. Emo Jingli did not even have time to vent his anger before Zhao Lian's prompt report made Emo Jingli spit out a mouthful of blood. A few months ago, Yi Ying's wound was not light and she had not fully recovered. In the past few days, Emo Jingli's anger had been rising. Now he was so angry that he finally vomited blood. "Your Majesty." The generals below were shocked when they saw the situation. She just didn't know what was written in the memorial to make the emperor so angry. Emo Jingli waved away the hand of the eunuch who came forward to help him. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and sneered, "Lei Tingfeng, pass down my decree. Order the general of the right wing to lead the troops to intercept Lei Tingfeng's troops. Be sure to catch them all in one fell swoop." "Your Majesty." The generals could not help but exclaim. The reason why they had the confidence to go north was because of their alliance with West Hill. Now they had not achieved anything in the confrontation with the Mahist army, but they had already started fighting with their own allies. It was obvious what kind of ending awaited them. "Your Majesty, please reconsider." A general standing at the front stepped forward and said, "Our army is now in a confrontation with the Mahist army. If we clash with the Xiling army again, I'm afraid that the Prince Ding mansion will benefit from it. In my opinion, the most important thing for our army now is to eliminate the hundreds of thousands of Mahist army led by Yun Ting outside the Cold Valley Pass. At that time, even if Princess Ding and Lu Jinxian's army reach the Cold Valley Pass, they will be surrounded by our army." The Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill suddenly broke the agreement, which indeed surprised and angered everyone. But not everyone was like Emo Jingli, who was so angry that he did not care about anything else. Now even if Lei Tingfeng left with his troops and left them to face the Mahist army alone, they would not necessarily lose. But if your Majesty were to fight with the Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon, then they would definitely lose. Lu Jinxian was not so kind as to wait for their internal conflict to end before starting a fight. Emo Jingli was silent for a while, then finally snorted and listened to his subordinate's suggestion. How could Emo Jingli not know that there were no benefits to fighting with Lei Tingfeng at this time? But he had just been viciously swindled by King Ding's residence, and now he was swindled by the King of Zhenan's residence. Emo Jingli could not swallow this anger. After a long time, Emo Jingli said in a deep voice, "Gather all the troops. Within 3 days I want to see Yun Ting's head." With nowhere to vent his anger, Emo Jingli could only take it out on Yun Ting, who was stationed outside the pass. "Understood." The generals below all quietly let out a sigh of relief. Compared to Lei Tingfeng, Yun Ting was naturally easier to deal with. And no matter from the current situation or the current battle situation, Yun Ting was their first target to eliminate. After dismissing everyone, Emo Jingli was alone in the silent tent. The expression on his face became more and more unsightly. Too many things had happened in the past few days. Now that he had come back to his senses, he finally understood that the so-called betrayal of the house of Marquis Muyang was a scheme by the Prince Ding mansion. And because of this, he lost 2 of his most capable subordinates. Presumably, Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li were secretly laughing at him right now. Chapter 980. Bam. Emo Jingli waved his hand and all the decorations on the table fell to the ground. None of the servants in the tent dared to clean it up. They just cowered and knelt on the ground, not daring to move. Emo Shuyao. I will never let you go. Emo Jingli's voice was cold and sinister as if it came from hell. Marquis Muyang woke up from his sleep. The scene in front of him dazed him for a moment. This was obviously not the prison cell he was in the Chu army camp. It was a gloomy dungeon. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Did the emperor move him here because he was worried that someone would come to rescue him? That was too much of a concern. He had given the power of the Marquis Muyang residence to Muyang, who would come to rescue him. He had slept for too long and his body was a little stiff. Marquis Muyang moved his body and sat up. But he was stunned when he saw the person not far away. In an instant, Marquis Muyang's face turned pale. His old and slightly drooping lips kept trembling. He stared blankly at the person outside the cell not far away. To be precise, it was a corpse. Muyang's lifeless eyes were wide open. The blood on his abdomen had already turned dark. There was also a hideous scar on his neck. It was clear that he had already lost his life. Yang-er! Marquis Muyang cried out in alarm. His old body rushed to the side of the cell at a speed that didn't match his physical condition. Unfortunately, he was blocked by the cell's iron bars. He couldn't touch the person lying there quietly. Marquis Muyang burst into tears. Yang-er! Yang-er! Who killed you? In the empty cell, only his mournful voice echoed. Marquis Muyang fell powerlessly to the side of the cell. He stared blankly at his son's corpse. In a moment, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Muyang was his only son and his only hope. After losing Muyang, it was as if everything in the world had lost its meaning. The Marquis Muyang residence is finished. His whole life he was obsessed with fame and fortune. He only hoped that the house of Marquis Muyang would flourish in his hands. But now the house of Marquis Muyang was destroyed in his own hands. His only son had died in front of him. Was he really wrong? Yang-er, why don't you just take my life? Why did you kill my son? Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Marquis Muyang's residence is so loyal. The Emperor Marquis Muyang called. Emo Jingli or Emo Jingchi. A slightly cold voice sounded from the outside, and the originally closed door of the dungeon was pushed open from the outside with a creak. A handsome man dressed in black walked in. Qin Feng. Did you kill Yang-er? Marquis Muyang was shocked. He originally thought that Muyang was captured by Emo Jingli, but it turned out that he had unknowingly fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. That's right. He recalled that he had suddenly fainted before he woke up. If it was Emo Jingli, there was no need for him to do so. Qin Feng did not deny it. He said calmly, since Marquis Muyang understands, you should also know why you ended up like this, right? Qin Feng might feel a little emotional about Muyang's death, but as for Marquis Muyang's fate, Qin Feng did not have the slightest opinion. The Mahist army valued loyalty the most. Before Emo Jingli had fallen ill and died, Marquis Muyang had already been in cahoots with Emo Jingli. Back then, Marquis Muyang almost caused the princess consort and the little heir to die tragically, which was a great hatred of the Prince Ding mansion. Perhaps from Marquis Muyang's standpoint he was just following orders. But from the standpoint of the Prince Ding mansion, especially from the perspective of Emo Shuyao, Prince Ding, this was a crime deserving of death. Perhaps this had nothing to do with right or wrong. The strong had the right to punish their enemies. Marquis Muyang could not help but tremble. He closed his eyes in pain. After seeing the people of the Prince Ding mansion, how could they not understand? He had been careful all his life. In the eyes of outsiders, he was a person who fawned over the powerful and lacked the backbone of a general. That was why, after King Ding's residence had declined, he wholeheartedly sought refuge with Emo Jingchi. He was not like Marquis Nan, who did not care about politics, nor was he like the Hua family who secretly helped King Ding's residence. He would do whatever the emperor wanted him to do. Wasn't he a subject? As a subject, it was natural for him to obey the emperor's orders, even if it was wrong. But the one wrong thing he had done in his life was to lead the troops to besiege Princess Ding. Because of this, he had cut off Marquis Muyang's escape route. So when he saw that Emo Jingli was about to die, he could only immediately seek refuge with Emo Jingli. He could not seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion like Marquis Nan and the Lung family, Nor did he have the courage to bet the entire Hua family to live and die with the Dechu state like Duke Hua. He wanted to live and hold power in his hands. He wanted the Marquis Muyang mansion to be passed down from generation to generation. But now, all these years of struggle and hard work were in vain. Prince Ding Mansion. Prince Ding Mansion. Why? I was only following orders. Marquis Muyang roared. He was unwilling to accept this. Back then, if he had a choice, would he have overestimated himself and become enemies with the Prince Ding Mansion? Perhaps, occasionally he had a thought. If the Prince Ding Mansion was completely destroyed, would the Marquis Muyang Mansion replace it? But that was just a thought. Qin Feng said calmly, when we came out, the prince asked me to pass a message to Marquis Muyang. Marquis Muyang looked at him. Qin Feng continued, the prince said the pain I experienced will be repaid 100-fold. Back then the prince spared Muyang's life. Now he's taking it back. Marquis Muyang was silent. Back then, after that incident, Emo Xiuyao still let Muyang go. Marquis Muyang had once felt lucky. So, Emo Xiuyao only felt that the blow to him was not enough. Chapter 981. Looking at Marquis Muyang's lifeless appearance, Qin Feng lowered his eyes and said, I'll take Muyang away. Marquis Muyang should still have some time to think about it. With that, Qin Feng clapped his hands. 2 guards came in and carried Muyang's body away. Wait. Marquis Muyang shouted anxiously, where are you taking Yang? Qin Feng frowned slightly. Princess Consort gave the order to bury Muyang. The original Lord Ai's order was not like this. But since the big thing was done, the prince would not mind a small change. Seeing that Marquis Muyang did not react, Qin Feng turned and left. Why, how did you do it? Marquis Muyang's old and weak voice came from behind, the spy of the Muyang residence. Who is it? Qin Feng turned back in surprise. He did not expect Marquis Muyang to still have the mind to care about this question. Yaoji, Qin Feng said lightly. Marquis Muyang was stunned. He did suspect Yaoji, but he dismissed the idea in the end. The most fundamental reason was still Mu Lai. A woman, no matter how much she hated a man, she would not bring her son to harm her son's biological father. As if understanding Marquis Muyang's doubts, Qin Feng said, Mu Lai is not Muyang's son. What? Marquis Muyang was stunned again. That woman's son. I see. Knowing that he misunderstood, Qin Feng did not intend to explain. He glanced at Marquis Muyang and turned to leave. The moment he closed the door, a burst of crazy laughter came from inside. But that laughter sounded more like crying to Qin Feng's ears. Sighing softly, Qin Feng shook his head and walked out. 1,000 miles away, Emo Xiuyao was sitting behind the desk in a daze with a gloomy expression in the tent. Feng Jiao came in and saw him. He raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? It hasn't even been a month and you're already missing Princess Consort? Emo Xiuyao glanced at him. How can a loner understand the thoughts of someone with a family? Feng Jiao rolled his eyes in annoyance. He was a loner. Who did this to him? He had not stopped for a moment in the past few years. He waved the secret letter in his hand and threw it over. A letter from Qin Feng. It seems like Princess Consort doesn't miss you. She didn't even send you a greeting letter. Emo Xiuyao raised his hand to catch it and lightly spat out. Scram. Opening the envelope, the contents of the letter made Emo Xiuyao's gloominess dissipate. He crumpled it into powder. Having known Emo Xiuyao for many years, Feng Jiao naturally understood Emo Xiuyao's expression. He asked curiously, what good news has made you so happy? Emo Xiuyao's mood was clearly different from when he first came in. It was clear that Qin Feng's secret letter had reported something good. Princess Consort and General Liu have already taken care of Mo Jingli and are preparing to come back. That's not possible. As long as Mo Jingli wasn't a pig brain, it was impossible for him to be defeated so quickly. Mo Xiuyao said, Mu Yang is dead. What kind of good news is that? Feng Jiao rolled his eyes. Mu Yang may be considered a rising star among the generals of Dechu State, but he probably did not have the qualifications for Prince Ding Mo Xiuyao to place such importance on him. Mu Yang's death, was it worth Missouri Xiuyao's joy? Feeling that something was wrong, Feng Jiao pondered for a moment before reacting. His expression changed slightly. Marquis Muyang's residence is finished? There weren't many people who knew how much Mo Xiuyao hated Marquis Muyang, but Feng Jiao was definitely one of them. In these years Emojingchi died. Ren Qining died. Helianjin also died. It should be Marquis Muyang's turn. However, Muyang's death was somewhat unjust. Back in the capital, Feng Jiao and Muyang were friends. He could only secretly feel pity for him. Emo Shuyao nodded slightly. Feng Jiao thought for a moment, then said, Old Marquis Muyang was one of the few people under Emo Jingli with brains. Marquis Muyang's residence is finished. Emo Jingli probably won't be able to hold on for much longer. In this way, after the princess is done, she can lead her troops to the west and surround the Xiling army with us. Lowering his head and calculating, Feng Jiao was also somewhat happy. If that was the case, perhaps the war would be over by the end of this year. Emo Shuyao said indifferently, not necessarily. Emo Jingli's troops are far above Lu Jinxian's. Moreover, there's still Lei Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng has already left the Chu army and returned to defend Yuming Pass. By the time Princess Li and the others finish off Emo Jingli, I'm afraid Yuming Pass will already be surrounded by Lei Tingfeng. Feng Jiao couldn't help but frown and asked doubtfully, Didn't you send He Su to Yuming Pass? Emo Shuyao smiled at him. Who told you He Su brought people to Yuming Pass? Then may I ask, Prince? Feng Jiao gritted his teeth. Where did He Su bring 200,000 troops to? It was no wonder that Feng Jiao was angry. The Mahist army's strength was originally smaller than West Hill's. When they were fighting fiercely with Lei Jinting, Emo Shuyao actually transferred 200,000 troops away. If he really wanted to go around Lei Jinting's flank, then so be it. But now, Emo Shuyao actually told him that he didn't go at all. Did Prince Ding think that fighting a war was a game? Or were these generals really too stupid, unable to understand Prince Ding's unfathomable thoughts? Seeing Feng Jiao's flustered and exasperated appearance, Emo Shuyao was in a good mood. Yuming Pass is more than 1,000 li away from us, and the road is difficult to travel. It's less than 300 li away from the Cold Valley Pass where Lei Tingfeng is, and it's all flat official roads. Even if He Su left before Lei Tingfeng, Feng San, how do you want He Su to get to Yuming Pass before Lei Tingfeng? Do you think that with Lei Tingfeng's intelligence he would leave such a loophole for us? From the very beginning he sent Lei Tingfeng to Emo Jingli's side precisely to guard against this. Feng Jiao was stunned. He forced himself to calm down, asking, In other words, Prince, you didn't plan to go to Yuming Pass from the very beginning? Emo Shuyao shrugged, saying with a smile, Why force yourself when you know it's impossible? Then where is He Su? Feng Jiao only felt the veins on his forehead throbbing. Emo Shuyao said with a smile, If he's not at Yuming Pass, then he's naturally somewhere else. Feng Jiao turned his head to look at the map hanging on the wall, hesitating for a moment before asking, Cold Valley Pass? Emo Shuyao smiled but didn't say anything. Feng Jiao could only look at the sky, speechless. He looked silently at Emo Shuyao for a moment and swallowed the words he wanted to say. He sighed and said, With Wang Fei and General Lu holding them back, Lei Tingfeng may not be able to get back to Yuming Pass so quickly. Emo Shuyao said, Even so, the two armies will arrive at about the same time. Also, at that time Yun Ting's army will probably be completely wiped out. Lu Jingxian and Li may also be surrounded by Emo Jingli alone. Feng Jiao nodded, accepting Emo Shuyao's words. In any case, even 10 of him wouldn't be a match for Emo Shuyao. In other words, we still have to fight head-on with Lei Jinting? Chapter 982. Emo Shuyao said with a smile, Isn't this interesting? After Lei Jinting, I don't have any opponents. Also, Feng San, don't you think that things have been too smooth for us these past 2 years? Feng Jiao was silent. In the past 2 years the Mahist army seemed to have the help of the gods. It had been too smooth. It had been so smooth that he almost forgot that there was no such thing as smooth sailing on the battlefield. Moreover, Lei Tingfeng was a rare genius in the art of war. It was simply impossible to end the battle as quickly as before. Emo Shuyao patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Don't worry, we will win. It's just a matter of time. Feng Jiao nodded and said with a smile, Of course. If you can't win against Lei Jinting, you will be laughed at. There was a little kid sitting behind him who wanted to laugh at someone. Emo Shuyao glanced at him indifferently. Not everyone can laugh at this prince's joke. On the battlefield outside Cold Valley Pass, the original situation was that the Chu army had an overwhelming advantage. No matter how brave the Mahist army was, It was still difficult for them to turn the situation around when facing an army that was several times their size. It was a pity that Emo Jingli didn't have time to be proud. A new black army appeared on the battlefield and created another black wave. Upon seeing the reinforcements, the Emo family soldiers who were already exhausted to the point of exhaustion immediately charged back with renewed vigor. The Chu army's victory was slowly pushed back. The two armies began to fight fiercely. Cold Valley Pass. Seeing the situation in front of him, Emo Jingli's face was as black as ink. The general standing beside him didn't have the same arrogance as before. He didn't dare to anger Emo Jingli anymore. Who is that? Emo Jingli stared at the brave general in black on the battlefield and asked in a low voice. The general at the side took a closer look and pondered for a moment before reporting, "Your Majesty, that should be the newly promoted general of the Emo clan army, Hisuk." Emo Jingli frowned and thought about this unfamiliar name. Hisu was originally a normal soldier under Murong Shin. In less than 8 years he rose from a normal soldier to the position of a commander. After the northern tribes and the northern army invaded, he didn't listen to orders to move south. Instead he gathered nearly 200,000 defeated soldiers and went to Chu Chongqing's flank and blocked many of the northern army. After that he joined the Prince Ding mansion and gained the trust of Princess Ding. However, there is news that Hisu was originally one of Princess Ding's men. The person next to him hurriedly reported what he knew. Hisu joined Murong Shin's army not long after Princess Ding was at Shattered Snow Pass. Also, it is said that the princess consort of the Prince Ding mansion had 4 shadow guards. Later, Princess Ding removed the position of the shadow guard. However, only Zhuijing Lin Han and Wei Lin knew of them. So Hisu is a chess piece that Yi Li buried in Dechu State more than 10 years ago, Emo Jingli said in a low voice. The general next to him didn't dare to say anything in front of the angry Emo Jingli. Emo Jingli glanced at the battlefield below. With the sudden addition of 200,000 fresh troops, the Mahist army became more and more courageous. On the other hand, the Chu army, who had already fought a great battle, gradually showed signs of decline. With a cold snort, Emo Jingli turned and left in a huff, leaving the generals looking at each other. Generally this. Emo Jingli didn't care, but it made things difficult for the people present. They didn't know whether the emperor meant to continue fighting or to withdraw the troops. Withdraw the troops. General Li, who had the highest rank, sighed helplessly. It looked like they wouldn't be able to gain any advantage in this battle. What else could they do but withdraw the troops? Outside Cold Valley Pass, Yun Ting, who had been fighting bravely, fell to the ground as he watched the Chu army gradually retreat into the pass. He didn't care about the many corpses on the ground and directly lay down. Raising his eyes and seeing Hisu walk over, Yun Ting forced out a smile and said, "Brother, thank you. Thought I was done for." As he spoke, his eyelids started to droop. In these 2 days Yun Ting had been very tired. This was the first time he had truly led an army by himself and the pressure was great. However, Emo Jingli didn't know what medicine he had taken. He didn't care that his rear was empty and desperately gathered the nearby troops to attack him. Over the past few days, Yun Ting could only remember 2 meals of porridge, and the rest of his memory was filled with battles. If Hisu had come an hour later, Yun Ting wasn't sure if he would have been able to hold on. Hisu didn't care about the mess on the ground. He casually sat down and asked, "Wang Fei ordered you to defend this place to the death?" Yun Ting dazedly shook his head. Hisu raised his eyebrows and said, "Then why are you defending? If I didn't come and Wang Fei and General Lu didn't have time to arrive, you would have died because of your stupidity." This place wasn't some military stronghold. The stronghold was at Emo Jingli's side. If he couldn't win, retreating 20 or 30 li wouldn't make any difference. "It's my first time leading an army. How can I lose my first time? I won't retreat even if I die." Muttering, Yun Ting's head tilted and he finally fell asleep. The soldiers who were cleaning up the battlefield came over. Seeing Yun Ting lying on the ground like a corpse, they looked at Hisu with some difficulty. "General." Hisu stood up and patted the dust off his body. He waved his hand and smiled. "It's nothing, General Yun is too tired. Carry him back to rest." "Yes." 2 soldiers, one lifting his body and one lifting his leg, carried Yun Ting back to the camp. In the meantime, Yun Ting's mouth twitched and he slept very soundly. Not far from Cold Valley Pass, Lu Jingxian's army had also just experienced a great battle. However, Lu Jingxian and Yi Li were much more at ease than Yun Ting. Looking at the secret letter that had just been sent from Cold Valley Pass, Lu Jingxian couldn't help but laugh. No wonder Wang Fei isn't worried. She already knew that Prince had sent reinforcements. Yun Ting, this kid really needs to be taught a lesson. Yi Li said with a faint smile. Just now he was leading an army alone. It's inevitable that he would be nervous. General doesn't need to be too harsh on him. It must have been hard for him to last so many days. Lu Jingxian nodded. He was very satisfied with this new disciple. The reason he said he needed to teach him a lesson was mostly for Yi Li to hear. Hearing Yi Li's tone, it didn't seem like she was going to punish Yun Ting. Lu Jingxian also relaxed. Putting aside the matter of Yun Ting, Lu Jingxian said in a low voice, as long as there's another battle, Zhao Lian won't be able to hold on. At that time we can directly take Cold Valley Pass and attack the Chu army with Yun Ting and Hisu. Yi Li nodded and said, Great General is right. However, even so, Mo Jingli should still have around 500,000 soldiers. This doesn't include the reinforcements that will come later. It won't be easy to deal with him in a short period of time. Lu Jingxian said with a smile, Wang Fei doesn't need to worry. As long as we can control the overall situation, we don't need to care about how many soldiers Mo Jingli has. Previously we let him take the initiative. Now that we have taken back the initiative, we don't need to be afraid of him even if he has 1,000,000 soldiers. Moreover, when they met up with Yun Ting, their total military strength would be around 500,000. There was no need to worry about Mo Jingli. Chapter 983. Yi Li smiled apologetically. I was too impatient. She actually didn't have much experience in real battles. The few times she had fought, she had ended the battle quickly. Lu Jingxian's current plan was to slowly grind away at Mo Jingli. This made Yi Li, who was used to winning in one strike, feel slightly uncomfortable. However, she quickly understood her problem and tried her best to adjust. Lu Jingxian smiled. Wang Fei is too serious. If we use all our strength to severely injure Mo Jingli, it is possible. But if we want to achieve the same result as we did in Huifeng Valley, it will be very difficult. If we let the remnants of the Chu army escape, I'm afraid that they will come back soon. Rather than this, it was better to take things slowly. They would fight until Mo Jingli couldn't fight anymore. Yi Li nodded. I understand. Thank you, General, for your reminder. Lu Jingxian quickly said that he didn't dare. Yi Li had a smile on her lips. But in her heart she started to think that it was time to use the chess pieces she had set up in Nanjing. Lu Jingxian was right. Rather than rushing for quick success and giving Mo Jingli a chance to come back, it was better to put in some effort and finish the battle in one go. In the Chu army's tent, Mo Jingli, who was reading through reports, suddenly shivered. A trace of confusion flashed across his dark face. He pulled at the bright yellow cloak on his body. 2 days later, the Mahist army and the Chu army's western army had another decisive battle. The Chu army finally couldn't hold up against the Mahist army's attacks. The situation was unsalvageable. The commander of the western army, Zhao Lian, was heavily injured and captured. Fighting against the Chu army was different from fighting against the western tomb northern militants. In the end, other than the conflicts between the upper echelons of power, the ordinary Chu army soldiers and Mahist army soldiers, as well as the people of the Chu state, were no different from the people of the northwest. They also never thought that after the Mahist army and the Dechu state broke off relations, they would become mortal enemies. So when so many Dechu state citizens fled to the northwest, the people of the northwest accepted them without any ill feelings. It was because they were one family to begin with. Just like the people in the northwest had never thought that the Prince Ding mansion would stay in that small corner of the northwest. The people of Dechu state never thought that the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army would abandon them. Therefore in this battle both sides still held back some of their strength. Killing each other was not something that made people happy. Whether it was the Mahist army or the Chu army, they usually would not kill prisoners or heavily injured enemy soldiers. And when the Chu army could not defeat the Mahist army after trying their best, the soldiers at the bottom had no qualms about putting down their weapons and surrendering. Zhao Lian's failure made Mo Jingli very irritable. Facing the approaching Mahist army led by Lu Jingxian and Yi Li, Mo Jingli very decisively abandoned his troops to guard Cold Valley Pass and escaped before Yi Li and the others arrived. This made the Mahist army speechless. Yunting could not think straight and would rather die than retreat half a step. And Mo Jingli retreated too quickly. With the natural defense of Cold Valley Pass, if the command was right, it would not be a problem to guard it for at least 2 to 3 months. At that time the Chu army's reinforcements would arrive. Although Mo Jingli's abandonment of Cold Valley Pass dealt a heavy blow to the Chu army's morale, it also brought a lot of trouble to Yi Li and the others. If Mo Jingli ran back to Jiangnan and did not come out, that would be fine. But with Mo Jingli's temper, he would definitely hide and wait for reinforcements to arrive before coming out to cause trouble. This would imperceptibly prolong the time that the Mahist army and the Chu army fought. As expected, in less than half a month, when the Chu army's reinforcements neared the north, Mo Jingli appeared again. This time, compared to the ambiguous alliance with Xiling to attack the Mahist army, Mo Jingli directly issued a decree as the emperor of Dechu state. He announced to the world that the Prince Ding mansion had betrayed the Dechu state and that Mo Shuyao intended to destroy the Dechu state and then ascend the throne. He also listed Mo Xuyao's 49 crimes to show that the Dechu state's attack on the Prince Ding mansion was righteous and in accordance with the will of the heavens. These things naturally did not affect the Mahist army. Yi Li only casually glanced at the decree that was sent to the Mahist army before handing it to Yun Ting. Yun Ting snorted disdainfully after reading it and used it to prop up the foot of the table. If the prince was interested in the throne, he would have ascended the throne long ago. Did he need to wait for Mo Jingli to issue a decree? Also, did Mo Jingli think that the world was blind? The Mahist army had never taken an inch of land from the hands of the Dechu state. The Mahist army had already cut ties with the Dechu state for a long time. No matter how one looked at it, the Prince Ding mansion had a solid foundation. Speaking of this, Yun Ting couldn't help but sigh at the prince's foresight. It had to be known that the Central Plains were not barbarians. They called themselves the land of etiquette. No matter if it was the court officials or the common people, they all placed great importance on etiquette. If the Prince Ding mansion had directly attacked the Dechu state, even if the Mahist army had conquered the land, with the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state, Prince Ding would be criticized in the history books. Wang Fei, a secret letter from Master Feng San. Just as everyone was mocking Mo Jingli's actions, the voice of a guard came from outside the tent. Yi Li slightly frowned and said, "Feng San? Bring it in." Feng Jiao was with Mo Shuyao. Under normal circumstances, Feng Jiao would not write a letter to her alone. Unless something had happened that Feng Jiao could not control with his power. Yi Li's heart sank slightly. She raised her hand to take the letter that the guard presented. The letter was sealed with wax. On the seal there was the highest level seal of the Prince Ding mansion. It showed that the contents of the letter were not ordinary. Calming her mind, Yi Li opened the letter and scanned it. The hand holding the letter trembled slightly and the letter fell to the ground. Yi Li's body couldn't help but soften as she fell into the chair. Yun Ting and the others sitting on the side jumped in fright and quickly came forward. Wang Fei? On a white letter, Feng Jiao's handwriting was messy and anxious. There were only a few words. The prince is heavily injured, return quickly. Chapter 984. Wang Fei. Everyone looked in shock at Yi Li, not knowing what had happened. It had to be known that even though Princess Ding's age was not older than anyone present, but that calmness of hers was something that even a veteran like Lu Jingxian, who had been through hundreds of battles, admired. To be able to make Wang Fei pale like this, the matter was probably... Yun Ting went forward to pick up the letter. When he looked down, he almost screamed, "Wang, shut up." Yi Li quickly recovered and cut off Yun Ting's words. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her eyes had recovered their calmness and indifference. Yi Li reached out. Yun Ting suppressed his shock and handed the letter to Yi Li with both hands. Yi Li took the letter and read it again. Then she asked, "Where is the person who delivered the letter? Let him in." A short while later, a young man with red eyes and travel-worn walked in. "Wang Fei." "Ajin," Yi Li said in a deep voice. Ajin was Mo Xuyao's most loyal person. At the same time, he was the person who rarely appeared in front of others and was the least likely to attract attention. Feng Jiao choosing Ajin to personally deliver the letter caused Yi Li to have some bad thoughts. Focusing, Yi Li asked softly, "Ajin, what happened to Prince?" Ajin bit his lip and looked anxiously at Yi Li. He said, Prince is unconscious. Feng Sangongzi wants me to ask Wang Fei to quickly return. Ajin knew that he was not smart, so he was more loyal than other people. Furthermore, His Highness and Princess Consort didn't despise him because he wasn't smart. Instead, they trusted him. This was why Feng Sangongzi had him personally deliver the letter. Otherwise, when the prince was seriously injured, even if it was Feng Sangongzi's orders, he would not leave the prince's side. Yili's heart trembled slightly. She nodded and said, I understand. You go and rest first. We'll leave tonight. Ajin nodded heavily. Although young Master Feng San had suppressed the news of Prince's coma, young Master Feng San couldn't suppress it for long if the prince didn't appear in front of people. If Princess Consort could hurry back as soon as possible, the situation would be much easier to handle. After sending Ajin out, Zhuijing and the others at the side spoke. Wang Fei, now we... Yili raised a hand to stop him from asking. Taking a deep breath, she said, Qin Feng, I will write a letter for you to personally go and deliver it to General Liu. Zhuijing, Lin Han, pack up. We will set off immediately. Yes, Wang Fei, Zhuijing and the other two said in unison. Then they quickly left the tent to make their own preparations. Yili looked at He Su and Yun Ting, who were left behind, and said, After I return, the Mahist army's actions against the Chu army will be under General Liu's command. You too must listen to General Liu's orders. Do you understand? Yun Ting and He Su nodded and said respectfully, This general obeys. Seeing Yili's slightly absent-minded appearance, Yun Ting couldn't help but say, Wang Fei, Prince's good fortune fills the heavens. He will definitely turn misfortune into good fortune. Wang Fei, please be assured. Yili smiled faintly and nodded, I understand. Mo Xiuyao's life was very strong. How could he die? Yili smiled faintly. But Yun Ting and He Su became even more worried. The two exchanged a look and then could only leave helplessly. In a certain camp of the Chu army, Mo Jingli was lying comfortably on a chair covered in thick fur in a grand tent. He was enjoying the dance of the dancers in front of him. He was holding an enchanting woman in his arms, and his usually gloomy face was filled with complacency. A general came in and looked at the singing and dancing in front of him. He frowned almost imperceptibly. Mo Jingli raised an eyebrow and asked, What is it? The general lowered his eyes and respectfully presented a secret letter. Mo Jingli opened it and read. He immediately roared with laughter. He sat up and held the woman's slender waist with one hand. He held the letter in his hand with the other. He was in a very good mood. Good, it really is good. It really wasn't a waste of Zhen. General Li passed down the order. Put down light cards on the roads leading to Fei Hong Pass and stop Yili. That's right, don't hurt her. Bring her to see Zhen. Zhen wants to see who will have the last laugh. General Li frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, he reported, Emperor, please reconsider. If Princess Ding is preparing to return to Fei Hong Pass, there will be Qi Lin protecting her along the way. It's already not easy to kill her. If you want to capture her alive, I'm afraid. It wasn't that he was looking down on himself, but against the Qi Lin that made the nobles of the various countries tremble in fear. Even the right people might not be enough. But the emperor wanted to increase the difficulty. He requested that Princess Ding not be harmed. Mo Jingli's face darkened with displeasure. He coldly said, You can't do it? General Li hesitated for a moment. In the end, he secretly sighed. It was fine. The possibility of killing Ding Wang Fei was so low that it was negligible. If he let Princess Ding escape because he showed mercy, it would be easier for the emperor to blame him. This subordinate understands. Mo Jingli nodded in satisfaction. Seeing that General Li still had a trace of confusion on his face, Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and smiled. You want to know why Yili is suddenly in a hurry to go back? Emperor, please tell me. General Li respectfully said. Princess Ding leaving was naturally a good thing for them. But with Princess Ding suddenly leaving and the emperor's overflowing joy, General Li knew that something must have happened at Fei Hong Pass. Mo Jingli said with a clear smile, For us, it is indeed a good thing. Mo Xiuyao is going to die. Isn't that a good thing? Hearing this, General Li was shocked. The words is going to die didn't seem to be used on Prince Ding. How many people in the world cursed Prince Ding to die early? But after so many years, the Prince Ding mansion rose and fell. Prince Ding was still smiling proudly in the world. To General Li, the words Prince Ding is going to die were more like a daydream. Although he was thinking wildly in his heart, his face was still very respectful. He didn't even forget to match it with a shocked expression. Seeing his subordinate's shocked expression, Mo Jingli's mood became even more joyful. He couldn't wait to see Yi Li's expression. Or Lei Jinting and Lei Tingfeng. This pair of father and son who burned the bridge after crossing the river. Didn't Mo Shuyao also die at his hands? Ahem, Your Majesty, it's best to confirm this matter. After all, Prince Ding is. General Li coughed and reminded Mo Jingli implicitly. That year, Prince Ding's injuries were so severe that the entire world thought he was crippled. But in less than 10 years, Prince Ding led the Mahist army and swept through the world again, causing people to tremble in fear. Seeing Mo Jingli's proud expression, General Li couldn't help but remind him to be more careful. There were some people in the world that were best not to provoke. If you already provoked them, then you had to be even more careful. Unless you saw his corpse with your own eyes, you couldn't let your guard down. Otherwise, the unlucky one would be you. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. It was rare that he actually listened to his subordinate's words. He nodded and said, "You're right. We should investigate this matter to avoid any mistakes. Mo Shuyao, we don't believe that you're that lucky. You didn't die last time, but you won't die this time." Chapter 985. In the dark night, a few fast horses galloped on the official road, kicking up dust along the way. Yi Li rode on the back of a horse and kept whipping her whip as she galloped forward. Because she had the memories of 2 lifetimes and was not an impulsive person, Yi Li had always been calm and unruffled. But this time she could not help but lose her sense of propriety. She allowed the cold wind to blow against her cheeks and messed up the hair on her temples. Zhuojing and the others followed behind Yi Li and were also galloping without stopping. The sudden accident in the originally smooth battle caught everyone off guard. Suddenly, the horse that Yi Li was sitting on let out a neigh and reared up. "Princess consort, be careful." Yi Li jumped up from the horse's back. When she landed on the ground, the galloping horse also fell to the ground. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, a rain of arrows came from both sides of the road. A murderous look flashed across Yi Li's beautiful eyes. She said in a low voice, "They've all been dealt with." In the darkness, countless men in black rushed out from the shadows, killing the archers on both sides of the road. Yi Li, on the other hand, had already mounted another horse and galloped forward. Behind Yi Li, Lin Han and Zhuojing and Ajin did not pay attention to the killing in front of them. They followed Yi Li's back. On the ancient road in the bleak moonlit night, a tall man stood silently by the side of the road. He raised his head and looked at the new moon in the sky. His blue cotton clothes looked even darker in the dark night. It also added a coldness and scruples that he did not usually have. The man held a heavy sword in his hand. It was as if he had just been standing there, but also as if he had been standing there since ancient times. On the road in the distance, the sound of horses galloping could be heard. A woman in black and a young man in green appeared beside the man. The woman in black frowned and said, "Big brother, are we really going to do this?" The man in green disagreed and said, "Big brother, offending the Prince Ding mansion is not a wise thing to do." The middle-aged man glanced sideways at his sister-in-law and said indifferently, "This is my business. You two leave immediately." A trace of impatience flashed across the young man's sinister face and he said snappily, "Big brother, if something really happens to Yi Li here, do you think the Prince Ding mansion will let us off? Since that's the case, what's the difference between you and the 3 of us?" The middle-aged man said, "This is my personal matter. Go back, this is an order." "But," the woman in black frowned. "Unless you don't recognize me as your big brother, leave immediately," the middle-aged man said. The black-clothed woman helplessly stomped her feet and pulled the green-clothed man, disappearing into the night. The 2 of them had just left when the sound of horse hooves, which was still very far away, had already reached them. The leader was a woman in white with a cloak draped over her shoulders. Seeing the middle-aged man waiting by the side of the road, a trace of surprise flashed across the woman's face and she pulled on the reins. Under the night sky, everyone was silent for a while. Yi Li said indifferently, "I never thought that one of the people who came to make things difficult for me would be the master of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce." The middle-aged man was one of the 4 great experts in the world. The master of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, Ling Taihan. Mu Qingzong had been missing for a long time and Lei Jinting was getting older. Ling Taihan and Mo Shuyao were the two people with the highest martial arts in the world. Moreover, Lei Jinting, who had spent his life studying martial arts, was definitely not as easy to deal with as Mu Qingcang. The moment they saw him, Zhuo Jing and the other two immediately stepped forward and shielded Yi Li behind them. As for their actions, Ling Taihan didn't pay any attention to them. He just looked at Yi Li faintly. A trace of regret flashed across his resolute and calm face. I also didn't expect this day to come. Whether it was his appreciation for Mo Shuyao, his friendship with Su Qingchen, or his pure admiration for this woman, Ling Taihan had never thought that one day he would have to make a move against her. Unfortunately, Wu Jing stood in front of Yi Li and said in a low voice, "Pavilion Master Ling, you are an expert of a generation. Are you not afraid that the world will laugh at you if word of this gets out?" Ling Taihan looked at Zhuo Jing with a half-smile and said indifferently, "The subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion are indeed all loyal and righteous. Don't tell me you don't know what this lord does?" The Yanwang Chamber of Commerce was an organization of assassins. Who would talk about fairness with an assassin? Asking an assassin to be honorable? When Ling Taihan was young, his martial arts had yet to be accomplished. As an ordinary assassin at the lowest level, he had used many despicable methods to assassinate his enemies. As the pavilion master of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, Ling Taihan had never placed much importance on his reputation. Zhuo Jing was speechless. He felt that it was ridiculous to talk about morality and reputation with someone who used to be an assassin. "I remember that Pavilion Master Ling and Genom of Gojoseon have a grudge against each other," Yi Li said indifferently. Mo Jingli alone wouldn't be able to move Ling Taihan, so it could only be Lei Jinting. Ling Taihan didn't deny it. He nodded and said, "That's right. But even so, I'm still from West Hill." Yi Li looked down and frowned. Speaking of which, not many people know about Pavilion Master Ling's background. Pavilion Master Ling is also a member of the Emperor of Shiling's family. Ling Taihan looked at Yi Li with some surprise. After a while he smiled and said, "Princess Ding is indeed extraordinary." Yi Li shook her head helplessly. "If Pavilion Master Ling didn't appear here, I wouldn't have made such a guess." Although there were many people who guessed Ling Taihan's background, Ling Taihan usually didn't have any flaws or loopholes. He hadn't interacted with the Emperor of Shiling for so many years, so it was naturally difficult for people to guess his background. But when Yi Li eliminated all the possibilities that could make Ling Taihan help Lei Jinting, there was only one left. The bad relationship between Ling Taihan and Lei Jinting wasn't just an act. To make Ling Taihan put aside the prejudice of so many years to help Lei Jinting, Ling Taihan could only be a member of the Emperor of Shiling's family. The long ancient road seemed cold and lonely under the dim moonlight. After a while, Ling Taihan said, "My mother used to be the imperial concubine of the late emperor." Yi Li raised her eyebrows. There were always schemes and conflicts in the palace. Ling Taihan was the prince of the late emperor of Shiling, but he only said that he had a grudge against Ling Taihan and not the Emperor of Shiling's family. It was likely that the early death of Ling Taihan's mother and her wandering in the Jianghu had something to do with Lei Jinting, or Lei Jinting's mother's family. Yi Li vaguely remembered that there was an extremely favored imperial concubine of the late Emperor of Shiling. Later she seemed to have been killed by the late Emperor of Shiling. But it was really too long ago, so naturally no one paid attention to it. Even Yi Li herself only glanced at Lei Jinting's file by chance. She didn't even remember the name of that imperial concubine. Yi Li sighed softly. She also understood that the situation before her was inevitable. She nodded and said, "Pavilion Master Ling, please make your move." Ling Taihan raised his eyebrows. "You're not afraid?" If Yi Li said that she was confident that she could defeat Ling Taihan, it was definitely a joke. If Ling Taihan went all out to kill, not to mention Yi Li, even if everyone on the battlefield was tied up, they still wouldn't be enough to kill Ling Taihan. Chapter 986. Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, "So what if I'm afraid?" If she was afraid that Ling Taihan would let her go, she didn't mind showing how scared she was. Ling Taihan looked down at the iron sword in his hand and said, "If Princess is willing, you can visit the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce as a guest. After half a month I will personally send Princess back." Ling Taihan made it very obvious that he didn't want to make things difficult for Yi Li. He just wanted to stop her from rushing back. As for whether Yi Li was alive or dead, It didn't make any difference to Ling Taihan. Ling Taihan didn't want to fight with her because of his friendship with Su Qingchen and his admiration for Yi Li. Unfortunately, although Ling Taihan thought so, Yi Li didn't appreciate his kindness. She smiled faintly and said, "Pavilion Master Ling, please." As Yi Li spoke, Zhuojing, Lin Han, and a Jin quietly moved and surrounded Ling Taihan. However, on the whole, they all seemed to be blocking Yi Li from entering the room. Seeing their actions, Ling Taihan's eyes flashed with admiration. He nodded and said, "In that case, I'll offend you." Ling Taihan slowly pulled out the iron sword in his hand. His movements were slow, as if he was hesitating whether to use the sword or not. Just as he pulled out the sword, Zhuojing, Lin Han, and a Jin rushed over from 3 directions at the same time. This was supposed to happen in the blink of an eye, but the moment they moved, they saw a cold light cut through the night sky. Ling Taihan's long sword swept toward Zhuojing and the others with a sharp sword aura. With Ling Taihan's skills, if Zhuojing and the others met him head-on, they would be injured or killed. So when they saw the cold light, the 3 of them changed their direction at the same time and brushed past the sword aura. A large piece of Lin Han's clothes was cut off. Zhuojing and the other 2 stared at the man in front of them solemnly. At that moment, they finally understood the gap between them and a real supermaster. Facing Ling Taihan's overwhelming pressure, the 3 of them only felt a faint burning pain in their hearts. If it weren't for the fact that the 3 of them were people with strong willpower, they would have already fallen to the ground. Zhuojing took a deep breath. Suddenly, he straightened his sword and charged toward Ling Taihan again. Figures danced in front of him and sword chi filled the air. However, Zhuojing's all-out attack was unable to disrupt Ling Taihan's state of mind. As they fought, Ling Taihan even had the time to speak. "That's right. In the world of martial arts, only speed is invincible. But, you're not fast enough." Ling Taihan's speed wasn't fast, but no matter how fast Zhuojing was, Ling Taihan's sword was always able to easily block at the most appropriate place. This kind of attack didn't just exhaust the opponent's physical strength and energy, it also wore down the opponent's willpower. Lin Han and Ajin looked at each other. Lin Han raised the sword in his hand and charged forward. Ajin waved the long whip in her hand. With a whoosh, it shot toward Ling Taihan like a poisonous snake. Yi Li, who was standing at the side, sighed slightly. She drew the short blade in her sleeve and charged forward as well. In terms of close combat, there weren't many people in the world who were Yi Li's match. But Ling Taihan was obviously one of them. Princess's skills. "It's a pity that your internal energy is too weak," Ling Taihan praised sincerely. As a woman, Yi Li's skills weren't bad. She had only been practicing internal energy for 10 years, but she was already comparable to Leng Luiyue. It was clear that Yi Li's talent wasn't ordinary. It was a pity that she had missed the best age to practice internal energy. Compared to a peerless master like Ling Taihan, she really wasn't worth mentioning. Yi Li's movements were even faster than Zhuojing and Lin Han's. Every move she made was aimed at a vital point. However, in Ling Taihan's eyes, such a dangerous move was still not enough. It was no wonder that she was the only peerless master in the world who could compete with Prince Ding. Although it was 4 against 1, Zhuojing and the others became more and more depressed. Just like how they couldn't win against Prince Ding, they also couldn't win against Ling Taihan, who was evenly matched with Prince Ding. "Princess, leave quickly," Zhuojing said in a low voice. Yi Li smiled bitterly, but her hands didn't stop moving. How could she leave now? Ling Taihan wasn't using his full strength. If she left, Zhuojing would die in a few moments at Ling Taihan's hands. More importantly, she didn't have the confidence that she could escape Ling Taihan's pursuit alone. "Princess Ding, I have offended you." Ling Taihan's cold voice carried a trace of regret. The sword in his hand moved like the wind, easily pushing Zhuojing and Lin Han aside. His sword went straight for Yi Li. "Princess!" Zhuojing and the other 2 exclaimed in unison. At the same time, Zhuojing whistled softly and rushed forward with Lin Han. The long swords in their hands fiercely chopped down. This strike used up all of their strength, and they actually managed to block Ling Taihan's strike. Ajin took the opportunity to pull Yi Li behind her with her long whip. "Princess, leave quickly," Ajin said, staring at Ling Taihan with an unfriendly expression. "Interesting." Ling Taihan raised his eyebrows as he looked at Zhuojing and Lin Han, who had fallen to the ground. They weren't injured. They just used up all their strength to block Ling Taihan's sword. But if these two people did not die this time, no matter if it was their state of mind or martial arts, they would have a huge improvement. The people from Ding Palace are indeed extraordinary. But, is there anyone who can block the next sword? Yi Li's expression was heavy. He had never felt so powerless in all these years. Qilin hadn't arrived yet. He must have been entangled by the people sent by the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce and Enchanting. Moreover, as the saying goes, a strong person can defeat 10 skilled people. In the face of absolute strength, no matter how many strategies and schemes there were, they were all empty words. Looking at the woman in white who was as calm as water, Ling Taihan sighed softly and waved the sword in his hand. Ajin swung her whip. The whip, which was specially made by a skilled craftsman, was easily cut by the sword. The sword swept toward Yi Li without stopping. Zhuojing and the others widened their eyes in despair. Whoosh! In the dark forest, a strong force shot out and hit Ling Taihan's sword. The sword that was stabbing toward Yi Li paused. Ling Taihan's expression changed slightly. His gaze shot toward the forest on the ancient road. Who is it? Chapter 987. In the woods, a man dressed in black strolled out. Under the dim moonlight, his determined face could be seen clearly. The middle-aged man with some wrinkles had a deep, chiseled face as if carved by a knife. The hair on his temples was already gray, and he looked indifferently at the people under the moonlight. Mu Qingtsong, Ling Taihan said in a low voice. Pavilion Master Ling, long time no see. Mu Qingtsong nodded faintly. The person who came was the former #1 master of Dechu State, Mu Qingtsong, who had suddenly disappeared. Mu Qingtsong looked at Yi Li, who was standing to the side, and said, Princess Consort, you can take them and leave first. Yi Li walked over to help Zhuojing and Lin Han up. She nodded and said, Thank you for your trouble, Mr. Mu. Ling Taihan silently watched Yi Li leave with her people. He didn't chase after them. He knew very well that if he didn't deal with Mu Qingtsong first, he wouldn't be able to touch Yi Li tonight. Although he was confident that he could defeat Mu Qingtsong, one of the former 4 masters in the world wasn't someone that could be easily dealt with. Moreover, he could feel that Mu Qingtsong seemed to be a little different from 10 years ago. 10 years ago he had a chance to fight with Mu Qingtsong. At that time he clearly felt that Mu Qingtsong was regressing. So he never took Mu Qingtsong seriously again. It was inevitable that one's strength would decline as they got older, but at that time Mu Qingtsong was clearly still in his prime. But when they met this time he found that Mu Qingtsong wasn't as bad as he had expected. He even made some progress. Moreover, Ling Taihan also had some things that he didn't understand. Frowning, Ling Taihan said, I didn't know that Mu Qingtsong would actually pledge allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion. Outsiders might not know, but how could Ling Taihan, who controlled the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, not know Mu Qingtsong's true identity? Mu Yang and Mu Jingmin had just fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion, but Mu Qingtsong came to save Princess Ding. This was really out of Ling Taihan's expectations. I'm not from the Prince Ding mansion, Mu Qingtsong said coldly. Ling Taihan raised his eyebrows. Then Brother Mu, why are you doing this? Mu Qingtsong said, It's just a deal with the Prince Ding mansion. I promised to protect Princess Ding at the Prince Ding mansion for 3 days. After 3 days you can kill me or torture me as you wish. Ling Taihan sighed helplessly and said, Although I don't want to fight with Brother Mu now, it seems that I have no choice but to do so. 3 days later, Yi Li had already returned to the Mahist army's camp. At that time, with the protection of hundreds of thousands of Mahist army and thousands of Qilin, it would be difficult to even get close to Yi Li, let alone kill Yi Li after you. Mu Qingtsong nodded indifferently. Soon 2 figures fiercely fought on the ancient road. Under the moonlight, the 2 figures met at times and sword chi shot out in all directions. The momentum of a fight between real experts was completely different from the fight with Yi Li and the others just now. In the dark, Leng Luiyue and Mu Qingtsong watched Yi Li and the others riding away. Leng Luiyue frowned and said, Should we help Big Brother stop them? Although they didn't agree with touching Princess Ding, since Big Brother insisted on doing it, they could only support him as his younger siblings. Sickly Scholar shook his head and said, No, let them go. The Prince Ding mansion isn't that easy to mess with, and Big Brother also went easy on them just now. With Ling Taihan's martial arts, if he really wanted to kill Yi Li, he could just hide in the dark and directly attack. Even if Mo Xiuyao personally came, he wouldn't be able to stop him if he wasn't prepared beforehand. They were assassins, so why would they need to stand on the side of the road and talk nonsense for so long? Leng Luiyue frowned and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's right, Big Brother promised to kill Yili on the road. If Yili herself escapes and returns to the Maoist army, then it's not our fault." Moreover, the other side also had the help of one of the world's top 4 experts. Even if Big Brother failed, no one could say anything. As assassins, whether it was the indifferent Leng Luiyue or the ruthless sickly scholar, they were all calm and rational people. With the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce's Jianghu influence, it wasn't a good thing for them to go up against the Prince Ding mansion, whose influence spanned over half of the original Xiling and Dechu state. Whether Mo Xiuyao was seriously injured or not, as long as Mo Xiuyao wasn't dead, the Maoist army and the Prince Ding mansion were still extremely terrifying existences. It should be known that when Mo Xiuyao's legs were crippled and he was poisoned, he still managed to protect the Prince Ding mansion, which was on the verge of collapse. Not to mention that the Prince Ding mansion's influence was at its peak. If Enchanting hadn't sent people to find Big Brother this time, they wouldn't even have known that Big Brother, who had no parents since childhood, was the prince of the Emperor of Xiling. However, for so many years the Emperor of Xiling had nothing to do with them. Big Brother had never received any benefits from the Emperor of Xiling. They had even been wantonly suppressed by Enchanting. Why should Big Brother go up against the Prince Ding mansion for the Emperor of Xiling? The battle between Ling Taihan and Mu Qingtsong lasted until the next morning. The morning sun shone on the side of the ancient road. Ling Taihan stood on the side of the road with the iron sword in his hand, looking down at Mu Qingtsong not far away. Blood quietly slid down his arm from his sleeves and fell into the dust at his feet. Dechu State's #1 expert, you really live up to your reputation, Ling Taihan said lightly. Not far in front of him, Mu Qingtsong half knelt on the ground with a pale face. His right shoulder was almost pierced through, and his abdomen was already dyed red with blood. This time, the two of them weren't the same as the previous spars between Ling Taihan and Mo Xiuyao. This was a true battle of life and death. In the past few years, Mu Qingtsong didn't pay attention to worldly affairs and lived in seclusion, concentrating on martial arts. After throwing away the shackles that had been placed on him, Mu Qingtsong gradually recovered and even improved his martial arts. Although he was slightly inferior to Ling Taihan when he fought with his life on the line, Ling Taihan was actually stopped here for an entire night. Mu Qingtsong casually wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled bitterly. Pavilion Master Ling is too kind. This one admits defeat. Ling Taihan shook his head and didn't say anything. Leng Luiyue and Sickly Scholar appeared in front of him. When they saw the dark red blood on the ground beside Ling Taihan, they stared unkindly at the heavily injured Mu Qingtsong kneeling on the ground. Big Brother. Mu Qingtsong reached out to stop Sickly Scholar, who wanted to kill Mu Qingtsong. The victor has been decided. There's no need to cause any more trouble. Sickly Scholar nodded and asked, Big Brother, are we still chasing? Ling Taihan smiled at his two younger siblings who had worried expressions. He raised his sword-wielding hand and said, I have internal injuries. Let's go back. Leng Luiyue and Sickly Scholar's eyes flashed with surprise. Big Brother really didn't plan on killing Princess Ding. Yes, Big Brother. Let's go back. Leng Luiyue stepped forward to support Ling Taihan. Ling Taihan waved his hand and said, No need. Brother Mu, do you need me to send someone to send you back? Thank you, Pavilion Master Ling. The Prince Ding mansion will take care of Mr. Mu. At some point, Mo Hua appeared on the side of the ancient road and looked at the three people in front of him with a cold expression. Seeing Mo Hua, Ling Taihan frowned. The assassins of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce who were sent to stop Qi Lin and the Maoist army's shadow guard were probably finished. Ling Taihan didn't know Mo Hua, but he could see that Mo Hua's martial arts were far superior to Zhuo Jing and Lin Han. Such a person didn't have the slightest reputation in the imperial court or in Jianghu. It could be seen that the Prince Ding mansion was really full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Chapter 988. Forget it, Yanwang Chamber. It's been too long and he's a little tired of it. Nodding, Ling Taihan said, Goodbye, if Prince Ding wants revenge I'll be waiting for you at any time. Leng Luiyue wanted to say something but Ling Taihan glanced at her. She had no choice but to shut her mouth and leave with Ling Taihan. Only Mo Hua and Mu Qingtsong were left on the side of the road. Mo Hua said in a deep voice, "Thank you for your help, Mr. Mu. How are your injuries?" Mu Qingtsong stood up, but his body was a little shaky. Although he fought with Ling Taihan for a few hours, his injuries were far more than Ling Taihan's. Ling Taihan said that he suffered internal injuries, but Mu Qingtsong knew that Ling Taihan only suffered some superficial injuries. Fortunately, I hope the Prince Ding mansion can keep their promise. Mu Qingtsong stared at Mo Hua. Mo Hua nodded, raised his hand and clapped lightly. Two men in black walked over with an old man. Rather than saying that they were carrying him, it was better to say that they were carrying him. The old man's hair was as white as snow, and his face looked like an old man who was already over 70 years old. However, those who knew him knew that he was 2 years away from 60. Even half a month ago he looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. "What did you do to him?" Mu Qingtsong's eyes turned cold as he asked sternly. Mo Hua said indifferently, "We didn't do anything. He was already like this when we brought him back." Ever since he saw Mu Yang's corpse, Marquis Muyang seemed to have aged 20 to 30 years overnight. Moreover, his mind was a little unclear. He was muddle-headed, and no matter how others treated him, he didn't respond. He would occasionally wake up, and no matter who he grabbed, he would call young. Even Mo Shuyao, who originally wanted to see him, had no interest in him. If not for this, Mu Qingtsong probably wouldn't have been able to see him. Mu Qingtsong supported his somewhat wobbly body and walked forward to support Marquis Muyang. He called out softly, "Father." As if he heard the word father, Marquis Muyang's dazed eyes turned and stared fixedly at Mu Qingtsong. After a while he said, "Yang? Yang. A trace of sadness flashed through Mu Qingtsong's eyes. He supported Marquis Muyang from the two black-clothed shadow guards and said, "Father, let's go home." Marquis Muyang had no objections and allowed Mu Qingtsong to help him walk away. Behind him, Mo Hua said in a deep voice, "In exchange for saving the princess consort, Marquis Muyang will be at your disposal. But, if he does something he shouldn't do again, Mr. Mu better remember Prince's words." Mu Qingtsong paused and said in a low voice, "I know. You won't see him or me again in the future." Looking at Mu Qingtsong and Marquis Muyang's departing figures, the shadow guard beside Mo Hua asked in a low voice, "Commander, are we letting them go just like that?" Mo Hua nodded and said in a low voice, "Mu Qingtsong saved the princess consort. When it came to matters related to the princess consort, the prince always kept his word. Moreover, the prince didn't kill Mu Qingtsong for so many years. Naturally, he wouldn't be interested in killing him now. Let's go back. We still have things to do in the army." Soon, the three black-clothed men disappeared from the side of the ancient road. On the official road, in an inconspicuous roadside courier station, Lei Tingfeng was sitting leisurely and drinking tea. Although he had been tricked by Mo Shuyao previously and had hurried back to Yuming Pass, the Xinghe Empire and the Western Xinghe Empire didn't have to worry about. However, the subsequent developments did not cause any harm to Xiling and the Lord of Jinnan's residence. On the contrary, Mo Jingli had surprised everyone with a single brilliant feat. He had made the Xiling army, who had been in a passive position on the battlefield, much more comfortable. Therefore, Lei Tingfeng's mood had been very good these few days. Seeing the three people strolling over not far away, the smile on Lei Tingfeng's face became even wider. He even got up to greet them personally. "Tingfeng greets the royal uncle." Ling Taihan looked at the man in front of him indifferently. "The Jiang who is uncivilized. I don't dare to accept the crown prince's greeting." Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, "How can that be? The royal uncle is the son of the royal grandfather, and also a blood relative of the emperor of Xiling. It's natural for Tingfeng to greet you." Ling Taihan frowned and looked at him for a moment. Suddenly he revealed a cold smile. "Lei Tingfeng, didn't your father tell you to stay away from me?" Lei Tingfeng was shocked. His father had indeed warned him before. It was just that he had some urgent matters to take care of, so he came personally. He didn't expect that he would lose his sense of propriety. Although there were many thoughts in his mind, Lei Tingfeng's face was calm. He said respectfully, "Nephew has been rude. Please forgive me, Pavilion Master Ling." Ling Taihan snorted and walked forward. Lei Tingfeng glanced at Ling Taihan's blood-stained sleeves and frowned slightly. He hurriedly followed and said, "Pavilion Master Ling, I wonder if Princess Ding..." "Princess Ding has left," Ling Taihan said calmly. What? Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but cry out. He really didn't expect that even the Yanwang Chamber's pavilion master couldn't kill Yi Li. His father had clearly said that Ling Taihan's martial arts were very likely above his. How could he not be able to kill Yi Li, whose martial arts weren't first class? Ling Taihan turned around and glanced at the shocked man behind him. Lei Tingfeng only felt his scalp go numb, but he still had to resist Ling Taihan's pressure and said, "Pavilion Master Ling, you clearly promised my father. I said I'll do my best." Ling Taihan interrupted him and said, "I've already done my best. But the martial arts of Yi Li and the people around her?" Lei Tingfeng said in disbelief. Sickly Scholar glanced at Lei Tingfeng and said, "Can't you see that Big Brother is already injured? If you think that anyone can catch up to Yi Li and kill her after fighting with Mu Qingtsong, why are you still looking for Big Brother?" Lei Tingfeng's heart sank. Even if they were scheming, they didn't expect that there would be another Mu Qingtsong. The former #1 expert of Dechu State, after being silent for nearly 10 years, the first thing he did when he reappeared was to ruin the Prince Ding Mansion's important matter. But, seeing the three people leisurely stroll, even Lei Tingfeng felt uncomfortable in his heart no matter how good his temper was. With Ling Taihan like this, who would believe that he didn't go easy? Perhaps because Lei Tingfeng's expression was too obvious, Ling Taihan frowned and looked at Lei Tingfeng and said, "Lei Tingfeng, do you think that because I'm injured I won't dare to kill you?" Lei Tingfeng's expression changed slightly. He lowered his eyes and said, "This little nephew doesn't dare. Since it's like this little nephew will take his leave." Ling Taihan didn't comment and only said, "Go back and tell Lei Jinting that I've repaid the favor I owe him. In the future, it's time to resolve the grudge between this lord and him." Lei Tingfeng said quietly, "This little nephew will definitely pass the message to father. Goodbye." Lei Tingfeng said quietly, "This little nephew will definitely pass the message to father. Goodbye." Although he didn't know what kind of grudge there was between father and Ling Taihan, Lei Tingfeng knew that the reason why Ling Taihan hadn't really caused trouble for Jinan Palace was because Ling Taihan owed father a great favor back then. Otherwise, as long as Ling Taihan chose to support the Emperor of Xiling, coupled with the power of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, he could give Jinan Palace a headache. Chapter 989. However, in the eyes of someone like Ling Taihan, there was obviously no such thing as erasing grudges. Once the favor was repaid, it was time to collect the debt. At this moment, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but wonder if his father and he had made a mistake in asking Ling Taihan to deal with Yi Li. After bidding farewell to Ling Taihan, Lei Tingfeng rushed back to the Xiling army without stopping. Lei Jinting saw his defeated expression and couldn't help but sigh. Without waiting for Lei Tingfeng to speak, he asked, "Ling Taihan failed?" Lei Tingfeng nodded. "Father, Ling Taihan deliberately let Yi Li go?" Lei Jinting asked with an ugly expression. Although he had considered this possibility when he went to find Ling Taihan had always been a man of his words and there really wasn't a more suitable candidate than him. He could only choose to believe in Ling Taihan. Lei Tingfeng said with some uncertainty, "Ling Taihan was also injured. It was the missing #1 master of Dechu State, Ling Taihan, who blocked Ling Taihan. The two fought fiercely for an entire night. By the time the victor was decided at dawn, Yi Li and the others had already entered the area controlled by the Prince Ding Mansion." He didn't know whether Ling Taihan had gone easy on them or not, but at least Ling Taihan wasn't that enthusiastic about killing Yi Li. Mu Qingtsong? Lei Jinting frowned. Ridiculous. Yi Li had just destroyed the house of Marquis Muyang. Why would Mu Qingtsong save her? Lei Tingfeng said, "I sent someone to investigate." The one who suddenly appeared to block Ling Taihan's sword was indeed Mu Qingtsong. After the two fought, Mu Qingtsong was seriously injured and took away an old man from the Prince Ding Mansion. According to my subordinate's report, it was very likely the old Marquis Muyang Mu Jingmin. Originally, Ling Taihan almost killed Yi Li. At this point, Lei Tingfeng also felt a little regretful. Although he admired Yi Li's ability and intelligence, they were still enemies. How could Lei Tingfeng not secretly grieving after losing an opportunity to get rid of such a powerful enemy? Lei Jinting shook his head. God's will. As long as Emo Shuyao really couldn't make it, so be it if Yi Li lived. What we should pay attention to now is the situation on the battlefield. Lei Tingfeng nodded and put away the slight depression in his heart. he said in a low voice, "Father is right. Now Emo Xiuyao is seriously injured and can't come out. But looking at the Mahist army's performance these days, Emo Xiuyao is probably seriously injured. Otherwise Feng Jiao wouldn't be in a hurry to get Princess Ding back." These days the Mahist army was no longer as elusive as before on the battlefield, making people tired of dealing with them. It was obvious that the commander had changed. Emo Xiuyao was seriously injured to the point where he couldn't even manage the military affairs. This was definitely good news for West Hill. Emo Jingli's hundreds of thousands of reinforcements have also arrived in the north. I'm afraid they are preparing to counterattack. As long as we take down the Mahist army here as soon as possible, Lu Jingxian won't be able to come back as reinforcements. Lei Tingfeng said. At the mention of Emo Jingli, Lei Zhenting frowned slightly and said, "Let him do what he wants. This is the only use he has." But, Tingfeng, Emo Jingli is a narrow-minded person who seeks revenge for the smallest grievance. This time he will definitely hold a grudge in his heart. If you encounter him on the battlefield, be careful of him. If necessary, think of a way to get rid of him. Father, Lei Tingfeng was startled. He looked at Lei Zhenting with a faint sense of uneasiness. Although his father usually taught him a lot of things, he didn't tell him how to deal with the ruler of a country. Lei Zhenting smiled faintly and said, "You are not young anymore. You should have taken charge long ago. When this battle is over, Zhennan Palace will be handed over to you." Father. Lei Tingfeng was shocked. He looked at Lei Zhenting worriedly. Lei Zhenting smiled unconcernedly and waved his hand, saying, "Forget it. Let's not worry about these things for now. We must pay attention to the defense of Yuming Pass. After all, in the eyes of the Mahist army, we are the true enemy. If there really is a crisis, Lu Jingxian might give up on Emo Jingli's side and come back with reinforcements." Even if they didn't want to admit it, the Mahist army's enmity towards the Chu army was not as great as their enmity towards the Xiling army. Even on the battlefield, the Mahist army and the Chu army's clashes were not as intense as the Xiling army's clashes. It wasn't that Lu Jingxian's army wasn't strong enough. It was that both sides still recognized that they were once a family. Therefore, if there really was a crisis at the Prince Ding mansion, Lu Jingxian would most likely give up on everything except Yuming Pass and attack the Xiling army instead. Lei Tingfeng nodded and said, "I understand." Lei Zhenting nodded with satisfaction and said, "Forget it. Go and do your work." Lei Tingfeng thought for a while and asked, "Father, did you already know that Ling Taihan couldn't kill Yi Li?" When he came back to report, although his father was a little unhappy, he wasn't very surprised or angry. Lei Zhenting shook his head and said, "It would be best if he could kill her. It doesn't matter if he couldn't." Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Zhenting in confusion and frowned. All these years, it was because Ling Taihan owed his father a favor that he didn't do anything to the Lord of Zhennan's mansion. Now that he had returned the favor, wouldn't the Lord of Zhennan's mansion have one more enemy? Lei Zhenting sighed and said, "Even if this didn't happen, I would still think of a way to make him repay that favor." Children are slow. Lei Tingfeng really didn't understand his father's thoughts. "Silly child, Ling Taihan owes me a favor, not you." In Ling Taihan's heart, there was no such thing as erasing the grudge between the two sides, nor was there such a thing as extending the favor to the next generation. However, most of the people who had wronged Ling Taihan in the past were still living under the protection of Zhennan Palace. Either he killed Ling Taihan before he died or he killed all these people before he died. Otherwise, Ling Taihan would still find trouble with Lei Tingfeng in the future. However, neither of these options were very realistic. Lei Tingfeng left in confusion. When he reached the door, he paused and suddenly understood his father's meaning. Lei Tingfeng frowned and gritted his teeth, but he didn't go back in. As expected, he wasn't strong enough. That was why his father was so worried about him. Chapter 990. By the time Yi Li's group arrived at Feihong Pass, it was already the night of the second day. Feng Jiao was already waiting outside Feihong Pass to welcome them. Seeing Yi Li's return, Feng Jiao clearly heaved a sigh of relief. "Princess, you're finally back." Seeing Feng Jiao's expression, Yi Li's heart sank slightly. She asked, "What happened?" Feng Jiao sighed. "The prince was ambushed by someone from Infinite Boundless Mountain." "How could he be so easily ambushed?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked. Putting aside how high Emo Xiuyao's martial arts, Emo Shuyao had clearly obtained the list of infinite boundless mountain spies in the Prince Ding mansion a long time ago. How could he still be ambushed? Feng Jiao helplessly smiled bitterly. We were careless. That person suddenly made a move and almost injured the little prince. The prince was also doing this for. Seeing Yi Li's expression change, Feng Jiao hurriedly said, "Don't worry, princess. The little prince was not injured." Seeing the unconcealable fatigue on Feng Jiao's handsome face, Yi Li nodded and said, "You've also worked hard these days. How is Shuyao?" Feng Jiao frowned and said, Princess, let's go back and talk." Returning to Feihong Pass because most of the soldiers still did not know that something had happened to Prince Ding, they naturally did not know that Princess had suddenly returned. Those who came to welcome Yi Li were only Yuan Pei, the southern marquis, and Murong Shen. Emo Shuyao was temporarily staying in the general's mansion in Feihong Pass. The group of people returned to the mansion and went straight to Emo Shuyao's courtyard. Entering the room, Yi Li saw everything in front of her and could not help but be stunned. She turned back to look at Feng Jiao and asked, "What happened?" There was indeed a person lying on the bed, covered with a thick blanket that covered most of his face. Only a head of snow-white hair was exposed. Even though Yi Li didn't walk in, she could tell that the person on the bed wasn't Emo Shuyao. Feng Jiao smiled bitterly. When the person on the bed heard Yi Li's voice, he suddenly sat up and got off the bed. His handsome face scrunched up tightly as he said to Yi Li, "You're finally back. I've been lying here every day pretending to be dead. I'm so tired." Han Mingxi. Yi Li raised her eyebrows, her cold gaze sweeping over Feng Jiao and the others. Feng Jiao said in a low voice, "Prince is missing." Missing? Yi Li frowned as she stared at Feng Jiao. Even though she wasn't angry, Feng Jiao felt his scalp go numb. When Wang Fei was truly angry, her power was no less than Prince's. Bracing himself, he nodded. Feng Jiao hurriedly recounted what had happened. Originally that day, the playful and naughty Emo Xiaobao had been kidnapped. The other party had left a letter for Emo Shuyao to go alone. Otherwise, they couldn't guarantee Emo Xiaobao's safety. Emo Shuyao naturally could not allow Emo Xiaobao to be harmed, so he went alone to the agreed-upon location. By the time Feng Jiao and the others found the place, they only saw Emo Xiaobao, who was unconscious with his acupoints sealed and the ground full of blood and corpses, but there was no trace of Emo Shuyao. After that, Feng Jiao and the others secretly ordered people to search the area within 100 li radius, but they didn't even see Emo Shuyao's shadow. Helpless, they could only pretend that Emo Shuyao was injured. At least they had to make people think that Prince Ding was still in the army. Yi Li frowned. Feng Jiao's narration sounded very normal, but it made her feel that something was wrong. It was too logical. How did Shuyao deal with the name list that I sent back? Name list? Feng Jiao frowned, then remembered. Last time when Wang Fei went to Jiangnan, she sent someone to send back the name list. Prince looked at it and kept it. Afterwards, he was busy with the war in the northern tribes. He didn't seem to have seen Emo Shuyao deal with this matter. If Yi Li's most trusted people were Qin Feng and Zhuojing, then Emo Xuyao's most trusted aide was Feng Jiao. If even Feng Jiao didn't know, that meant that Emo Shuyao indeed didn't deal with this matter. But this was clearly illogical. Infinite Boundless Mountain had planted spies in the Mahist army. Ignoring them was definitely not Emo Shuyao's style. Unless he had other uses for them. Han Mingxi laughed mockingly. Some people like to think themselves clever and ended up making a fool of themselves. Mingyi. Han Mingyue, who had just entered, had just happened to hear Han Mingxi's words as she said rather helplessly. Glancing at Yi Li's furrowed brows, Han Mingyue also knew that now was not the time for jokes. She said rather apologetically, "June. Princess, I didn't." Yi Li tugged at the corner of her lips lightly, saying with a mild smile, "I understand. Young Master Mingyue, is there any news?" Han Mingyue shook her head, frowning. According to the news from various sources apart from ourselves, neither Emo Jingli nor Lei Jinting know that Shuyao has gone missing. This also means that Emo Jingli's spy did not return. It is possible that he is already dead or has escaped. In comparison, the possibility of him being dead was higher. If he was still alive, it was impossible for him not to return to find Emo Jingli, and then report the news of Emo Shuyao. If he had succeeded, there would be even less of a need for him to escape. After killing Prince Ding, Emo Shuyao, Emo Jingli's reward would be enough for him to live in luxury for several lifetimes. Moreover, if he escaped alone, he would have to face the pursuit of the Prince Ding mansion. Where could he escape to? Now, whether it was Emo Shuyao or this spy, they did not have any news of them. Yili thought for a moment before asking, "Who is that person?" Feng Jiao's expression was somewhat ugly as he said, "He is Prince Ding's bodyguard, a member of the Shadow Guard." Prince Ding's martial arts were extremely high, and the amount of time he needed to accompany the Shadow Guard was almost negligible. Furthermore, Emo Shuyao had many experts by his side, and there was no need for him to personally train his subordinates like Yili. Therefore, compared to the current status of Zhuojing and the others, the Shadow Guard by Emo Shuyao's side could almost be said to be inconspicuous to the extreme. After the role of the Shadow Guard was gradually taken over by Qilin, these Shadow Guards were even less noticed. Even so, however, the Shadow Guard was still an extremely important force of the Prince Ding mansion. Compared to the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry, they were even more important because they were closer to Prince Ding in the shadows than the army. Who would have thought that Infinite Boundless Mountain would actually be able to insert someone into the Shadow Guard? Fortunately, Infinite Boundless Mountain had already been destroyed. Otherwise, it would have been even more disadvantageous for the Prince Ding mansion. "Tell Emo Hua to come see me," Yili said in a low voice. "You all go and rest. These few days have been tiring. If there is anything, we can talk about it tomorrow." Everyone looked somewhat worriedly at Yili. These few days had indeed not been easy for them. However, having traveled for 2 days and 2 nights, the expression of the princess consort was even more unsightly. Han Mingyue and Feng Jiao exchanged glances. Feng Jiao nodded, saying, "Yes, we will take our leave. Princess consort, you should also rest well." Yili nodded, not saying anything else. Everyone quietly retreated, leaving her sitting alone under the lamp, lost in thought. "Mother." It was already late at night, but the study was still very quiet, with only the occasional soft sound of candlelight bursting. Yili sat alone behind the desk, her brows lowered as she pondered. From the door of the room came some whispers. Yili raised her head and looked over. Emo Xiaobao was wearing a moon-white inner garment, not even wearing an outer garment as he stood at the door, staring at her. Chapter 991. Although it was the beginning of spring, there was no warmth in the northwest whether it was day or night. Yili's eyes darkened. She quickly got up and took the cloak from the side to wrap him up. The adult's cloak was draped over Xiaobao's body and immediately wrapped around him. Yili carried him to the side with some difficulty and sat down. "Why didn't you put on the cloak properly before running out?" "Mother." Emo Xiaobao looked at Yili, his big round eyes flashing with tears. He sobbed, "Mother. Xiaobao didn't do it on purpose." "Ooh. Xiaobao didn't do it on purpose. Xiaobao knows he was wrong, mother." "Why are you crying?" Yili raised her hand to gently wipe away the tears hanging on his face. She raised her hand to rub his pink little face and said, "Mother knows it's not your fault. Don't be afraid. Your father will be fine, he will be back soon." Emo Xiaobao sniffled and said seriously, "Father is back, Xiaobao won't make father angry anymore. Mother, Xiaobao will be good in the future." Yili lowered her head and kissed her son's forehead. "Mother knows that Xiaobao is a good child. Don't be afraid, nothing will happen." Emo Xiaobao was smarter than most children. This meant that he knew a lot more than other children his age. Although Feng Jiao and the others didn't say anything in front of him, they didn't even tell him about Emo Shuyao's disappearance. But he already knew. It was just that these days, everyone in Ding Palace who knew the situation was worried and busy. No one paid attention to his movements. He also did not tell anyone anything. But no matter how smart he was still a child. Now that his mother was back, he couldn't hold back anymore. He didn't even wear his outer clothes and quietly avoided the shadow guard and ran to the study to find Yili. Emo Xiaobao sat in Yili's arms, his big watery eyes filled with worry. "Mother, will father really be all right?" Yili faintly smiled. "Don't worry, nothing will happen. It's already very late. Xiaobao, go back and sleep, okay?" Emo Xiaobao raises his hand to rub his eyes. "Xiaobao will accompany mother." "Alright, mother still has something to do. If you're sleepy, why don't you sleep for a while?" Yili carefully adjusted the cloak on his body and softly said. After Emo Xiaobao nodded in agreement, He sat in Yi Li's arms and looked at the booklet in Yi Li's hand with wide eyes. In the past few days, Emo Xiuyao had suddenly disappeared. Many matters had piled up in the Mahist army that Emo Xiuyao or Yi Li had to deal with personally. Yi Li looked at 2 booklets and then looked down to see that Emo Xiaobao had already closed his eyes and fallen asleep. In the past few days, it wasn't only the adults who had been frightened and tired. Children's hearts were even more sensitive, so Emo Xiaobao was also very tired. Sitting in his mother's arms, he quickly fell asleep. This subordinate Emo Hua requests an audience with Wang Fei. At the door, Emo Hua's faint voice came. The brush in Yi Li's hand paused. Putting down the brush, she softly said, "Come in." Emo Hua walked in. Seeing Emo Xiaobao in Yi Li's arms, she was also stunned. "Wang Fei, little Shitzi." Yi Li waved her hand and said, "Wait." Picking up Emo Xiaobao, she turned and went to the room in the study to rest. Putting him on the bed and covering him with a blanket, Yi Li turned to look at Emo Hua and asked, "You brought Mu Qingsong?" A trace of surprise flashed through Emo Hua's eyes. She said in a deep voice, "This subordinate was a step late and frightened Wang Fei. Wang Fei, please punish me." Yi Li shook her head. Looking at her, she asked, "Where did the prince go?" "This subordinate doesn't know." Emo Hua lowered her eyes. "You don't know?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at Emo Hua with a smile that wasn't a smile. "If you don't know, how did you know to bring Mu Qingsong to save me?" "As far as I know, there aren't many people who know Mu Qingsong's whereabouts and can ask him in advance. Among them shouldn't include Commander Emo. In addition, the place where Mu Qingsong is in seclusion is 3 days away from the place where Ling Taihan tried to kill me. From Feihong Pass it would take more than 2 days to get there. In other words, before the prince was injured you had already set off. Commander, did you know in advance that the prince would go missing and this consort would be killed by Ling Taihan when she returned?" In this world there weren't many people who could deal with Yi Li and Qi Lin. If it wasn't for Ling Taihan or Lei Zhenting personally taking action, there was no need to trouble Mu Qingsong. Even the current Lei Zhenting might not be able to do it. Therefore, if there wasn't extremely accurate information or premeditation, Emo Hua wouldn't have time to find Mu Qingsong to save her. Emo Hua was silent. Yi Li looked at him calmly and nodded. "I understand. You just need to tell me, is Xiuyao still alive?" Shake your head or nod your head. Although Emo Hua was a bit arrogant, he was a person who abided by the rules. If it wasn't for the fact that he really couldn't say it, he wouldn't refuse Yi Li with such a silent attitude. After a long while, Emo Hua finally nodded slightly. Yi Li heaved a sigh of relief. He was obviously relieved. No matter what, Emo Xiuyao being alive was the best news. No one knew that even though Yi Li already had some speculations in her heart, when she was waiting for Emo Hua to nod his head, her heart still felt like it was being ruthlessly grasped by someone. She didn't even dare to imagine what would happen to her if Emo Hua's answer wasn't what she thought it would be. Yi Li nodded lightly. Emo Hua didn't want to say more because Emo Xiuyao ordered him not to. Although she was a bit unhappy that Emo Xiuyao hid things from her, Yi Li also knew that many things were very important to keep secret. After all, even if she had already gotten the list of names that Dongfang Yu gave to Emo Jingli, but who could guarantee that Dongfang Yu really gave them all? Where did Mu Qingsong go? After confirming that Emo Xiuyao was fine, Yi Li was in the mood to pay attention to other things. When she spared Mu Qingsong's life back then, she really didn't think that she would be saved by him one day. Emo Hua respectfully said, "Mr. Mu took Marquis Muyang and left." What Emo Hua didn't say was that Mu Qingsong's injury was quite serious. He probably wouldn't be able to recover to his current level within 10 years. However, in Emo Hua's view, Mu Qingsong's injury was very valuable to be able to let Wang Fei safely escape from the Yanwang Chamber's master. Ling Taihan. Yi Li frowned. Now that Emo Xiuyao wasn't here, if Ling Taihan continued to oppose them, it would be very troublesome. Then Yi Li had to find a way to get rid of him first. Even after experiencing a life-and-death situation, Yi Li still didn't have much malice towards Ling Taihan and didn't want to become enemies with him. It wasn't just because of the friendship between her eldest brother and him. In fact, Yi Li also knew that Ling Taihan didn't intend to kill her. Even if Mu Qingsong didn't feel it that day, in the end she was most likely to be seriously injured and taken away by Ling Taihan. With Ling Taihan's strength, if he really wanted to kill her, there were many opportunities. Emo Hua said, Ling Taihan only promised Lei Zhenting to kill Wang Fei on her way back to Feihong Pass. Since Wang Fei has returned, Ling Taihan won't make a move anymore. Moreover, according to the news from below, Ling Taihan has already brought people back to Yanwang Chamber. And this time, Yanwang Chamber didn't have no losses. To stop Qi Lin, the most powerful person in the Mahist army, even if it was only for a short while, Yanwang Chamber paid a heavy price. In the next few years, Yanwang Chamber wouldn't be able to deal with assassins anymore, unless Ling Taihan, Leng Luyue, and Sickly Scholar personally made a move. Chapter 992. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said, "Very good, you can go back and rest." Mo Hua respectfully nodded. This subordinate bids farewell. Watching as Mo Hua closed the door and left, Yi Li looked at the flickering candlelight in front of her. A cold smile appeared on her beautiful face. "Mo Shuyao, have you become addicted to playing games?" In a mysterious stronghold in the Prince Ding mansion, the white-robed and white-haired Prince Ding lazily leaned on the bed as he played with a simple and elegant green jade hairpin in his hand. There was a thick layer of white muslin wrapped around his casually draped outer robes. His handsome face was slightly pale, but his energy was very good. Looking at the green jade hairpin in his hand, Mo Shuyao sighed regretfully. Yi Li had returned, but he could not go back to see her. It was too annoying. Achoo! His Highness Prince Ding sneezed in an unglamorous manner as he tugged at the outer robe on his body in confusion. With his martial skills, even if he did not wear clothes, he should not feel cold. Did he catch a cold? The next morning, everyone came early to the study to request an audience with Yi Li. Even though Wang Fei had returned, there was still no news of the prince. The situation on the battlefield was starting to develop in a direction that was not in their favor. This caused the generals to stay up all night and head to Yi Li's courtyard early in the morning. A short while later, Yi Li came out holding Mo Xiaobao's hand. Mo Xiaobao was dressed in an inky robe embroidered with dragons. Even though he still appeared very young, his extraordinarily handsome face was tense and he looked like a little adult. "Everyone sit," Yi Li said faintly and led Mo Xiaobao to the main seat. Looking at Mo Xiaobao sitting next to Yi Li, Feng Jiao suddenly had a bad feeling. He hesitated before asking, "Wang Fei, this little shitzi?" Feng Jiao wanted to say that they were discussing important matters and it was not appropriate for the little shitzi to be here. What if mentioning the prince scared the little shitzi? Yi Li said, "No need, I've already told you Chen. He knows what to do." Everyone looked at each other and exchanged looks. Everyone knew that the prince never called the little shitzi by his full name. Wang Fei, who had insisted in the end, was assimilated by the prince and called the little shitzi by his nickname. When the princess called out Mo Yuchen's name, it meant that she had made a serious decision. Mo Xiaobao had a handsome face and he nodded seriously. Feng Jiao's mouth twitched and he asked, "Wang Fei, what do you mean?" Yi Li said faintly, "Spread the news that Prince Ding's injury has worsened. Send a letter to Li City and ask Mr. Shen to come over as soon as possible. Half a month later, hold the funeral for the prince." Everyone looked in shock at Princess Ding, who was dressed in green and had an indifferent expression. Feng Jiao stuttered, "Wang Fei, this subordinate feels that Prince Mo Shuyao was that unkillable thing." Even if there was no news now, Feng Jiao would at most guess that he was unlucky and broke his leg again and couldn't crawl back. But he never thought that he would die like this. Moreover, it was hard to accept that Wang Fei, who had always been deeply in love with Mo Shuyao, would say something like this. He is seriously injured and unconscious. What's the difference between that and death? Let's do it this way, Yi Li said. Han Mingyue looked at Yi Li and raised her eyebrows. She stopped Han Mingxi, who wanted to speak, and said, "Holding a funeral is indeed a good choice. It will be easier to believe if Mr. Shen comes over. I think that neither Mo Jingli nor Genom of Gojoseon will doubt it." After she said this, everyone suddenly realized that they had missed something. Wang Fei's arrangement didn't mean that Wang Fei believed that the prince was dead, but she wanted others to believe that the prince was dead. Feng Jiao's heart moved. He looked at Yi Li and said, "Wang Fei, you have the prince's whereabouts?" Yi Li shook her head regretfully and said, "Let's not care about the prince for now. Withdraw all the people we sent out to find him. What we need to do now is to stabilize the current situation." Marquis Nan? Marquis Nan stood up and said respectfully, "Previously, Our army had fought with the Shilling army several times. Thanks to the prince's divine art of war, our army had always won more than lost. However, ever since the prince, Enchanting's attacks have suddenly become much stronger. Our army has found it difficult to deal with. Although the Mahist army was valiant, the Shilling army wasn't bad either. Not to mention that the Shilling army's numbers were far greater than the Mahist armies. Originally, when Emo Shuyao was here, they didn't feel anything. Once Emo Shuyao was gone, the Mahist army's disadvantage was immediately exposed. Yi Li nodded and said, "You don't have to blame yourselves. It has been hard on you these days. Now that the Shilling army is strong, we don't have to fight them head-on. Let's try to avoid them." "Wang Fei, what do you mean?" Shen asked. Yi Li said, "Avoid their sharp points and attack their weak points. Generals, let's split up and fight for ourselves. Feihong Pass will still be guarded by me and General Yuan Pei." Feihong Pass had been constantly strengthened by the Mahist army for more than 10 years. The degree of easy to defend and difficult to attack was definitely not inferior to the Cold Valley Pass, which was known as the impregnable pass of the Central Plains. The Mahist army really didn't have the chips to fight the Shilling army head-on now. "But Wang Fei, if Enchanting tries his best to attack Feihong Pass, I'm afraid that you and General Yuan," Yi Li smiled and said, "so, you have to make him unable to do his best. I believe that this is what the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry are good at. In addition, you don't have to worry about Feihong Pass. We have a batch of interesting things that will soon arrive at Feihong Pass. If Enchanting still wants to break through Feihong Pass, he can only use human lives to make up for it. I also want to know how many Shilling soldiers he is willing to sacrifice to attack Feihong Pass." Although they were a little curious about what the Wang Fei meant by interesting things. But looking at Yi Li's calm appearance, they couldn't help but feel relieved. They cupped their hands and said in unison, "We obey." You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.